it's 2 o'clock as far as my phone tells me, so howdy everybody. I love that you're trained. This is excellent. Yes, this is the proper way to address me. Howdy. Welcome to our first State of the United Methodist Church session for our congregation. My goal for us today is to talk a little bit about who we are as United Methodist Church, as United Methodists, a little bit about how we're organized, and then talk about the cloud that is above us right now. Let's put it that way. The cloud is over us as United Methodist Church. My guess is if you read my letter, because I know you all read my letter in the newsletter, right? Yes. You maybe saw a news story on Fox this week here in town, or you've done something, but my guess is you've all heard something along the lines of stuff going on in our denomination. So my goal is to talk a little bit about that, talk about the future as cloudy as it may be, and then at the end to very narrowly opening up some time for questions, okay? And we will talk about that, yes. I believe in boundaries, so that's my goal. And so I'm going to be talking a lot here, I'm going to tell you right now, all right? And I didn't get to preach fully in the first service, and so... And the volume didn't work on the video in the second service? No, not at all. So anyway, but yeah, I'll be talking a lot. And so if you have a question that pops in your head while I'm talking, I encourage you to write it down on something in front of you. Okay? I know there's pens and pencils around you. Probably old bulletins sitting in the pews. I don't know what, but maybe grab something to write on, or remember it in your head. And you can ask it later on. All right? Sound good? I'm going to open with prayer. Just want to set up. Okay, we're good. All right, let's pray. O God of peace, O God of all things, the great God of creation, you who are the breath in our lungs, the life in our bodies, you who are salvation and life in abundance, we ask that you open our hearts and minds to you as we hear your voice calling us. Pray, O God, for peace, for right hearts and right minds, for relief from anxieties and stresses, for a clearer vision, and for us to remain steadfast in our identity in you, and you alone, our God, first. So we pray that you might guide us as a congregation, as part of the United Methodist Church. We thank you for this congregation for 130 plus years of faithful service to this community. And we thank you for our denomination, United Methodist Church, for all that is done through this denomination in order to be your hands and feet in our world. So God, take us as you will, use us as you will, but above all, help us to find ourselves first in you, and in doing so, we might be a people of peace and hope and love above all else. We pray this in Christ's glorious name. Amen. All right, so if you've ever sat in a UMC 101 class from me, I talk history, I talk what we call polity, which is how we're organized. I'm going to do that today, abbreviated. There's stuff that I'm going to say today that some of you already know, okay? There's stuff that I'm going to say today that you thought you knew and you didn't really know, all right? And hopefully what I say today is correct. Now, I've done this a billion times, and I'm fairly well trained in our history and our polity, at least, our organization, so I'm fairly sure that I'm going to be talking logical here in a minute. But anyway, that's my goal, is to talk history and our organization, because that plays into what we're talking about as a whole as a denomination. So one more time, if you have questions, write them down, think about them, and ask them later. So history of the United Methodist Church, we really begin with the Methodist movement, all right? The Methodist movement begins with a guy named John Wesley. John Wesley was born in 1703 in England. He was son of a Anglican priest or an Anglican pastor, let's put it that way, Church of England, right? And he grows up in the Church of England. feels a calling very early on because of a dramatic moment in a fire to become a pastor as well, and he does so. John Wesley does so. He gets trained at Oxford University in England, which of course is, that's one of those preeminent places that you get trained as a pastor. But Wesley didn't know grace at this point in time in his life, and so he was very much you got to pray a certain number of times every day and read the Bible a certain number of times every day and help a certain number of people every day. I mean, he was at least balanced, doing all the things, but he literally had a spreadsheet, okay, about making sure that he was holy enough every day. And he thought that's how he had his relationship with God. And obviously that was burdensome, and it was impossible to obtain or to get to the level that he thought he needed to be. So he was constantly a person racked with anxiety, which is ironic because we're a denomination full of anxiety right now. But anyway, he goes off on a mission voyage to Georgia, which at that point in time was one of the 13 colonies. This is before the American Revolution. Has a horrible experience, goes back home dejected. But it's through that eventually he comes to understand this idea of God's grace. And it's because of some wonderful people that God put into Wesley's life during that time. And finally, one night in 1738, while he's 35 years old, he has what we call his heart strangely warmed experience, where he understood God's grace, and that it was God's grace that drew us to God and changes us and leads us to salvation in Jesus Christ and so forth. And so that spurs the Methodist movement from there. By the way, Methodist was meant to be a derogatory term that he turned into a positive term. That's another story for another day. So Wesley never intended to create his own church. He was a Church of England man through and through. He was a Church of England pastor from a Church of England family. And early on, what he was hoping to do was reform the Church of England, away from that works righteousness mindset, which is what Martin Luther had tried to do 200 years earlier or so. And he had some success, but really the people that Wesley focused on were not the regular church people, okay? If you were going to cathedrals in England in the 1700s, you probably were not the person that Wesley wanted to talk to, because they were quite happy with the way things were. Wesley was reaching out to very poor people in England, people dealing with addictions in England, miners, people working in the mines, the imprisoned in England, those kind of people, the people that were cut off from the church because they didn't follow the rules properly. That was kind of my sermon today, by the way, that I didn't get to preach. So anyway, and he begins setting up what we call bands, societies, and classes. Not that order, but anyway. The point being, he would go to community, he would set up groups of Methodists that were still part of the Church of England, but they were religious small groups, I guess you could say, which were small group people, first of all. Large small groups that then fed into smaller ones, okay, is the idea. And to be a Methodist, you had to be a part of these small groups, but they were about studying the Scripture together and fellowshipping together and eating together and worshiping together and holding each other accountable. That's been at the heart of Methodism from the very beginning, is that if you're going to be a Christian, you're going to be a Christian, and you're going to be held up by each other. You're going to support each other, but also hold accountable each other for that. And to the extent that, Wesley gave tickets to be a part of these societies, and if you didn't follow the rules, you lost your ticket, okay? It was that strict, okay? And so this actually catches on fire throughout England. It goes into Ireland, eventually goes overseas to the colonies, in American colonies, because people were hungering for this. This was for a lot of them, they weren't part of the church. They weren't welcome in the church. And so Wesley was reaching people that nobody else was reaching. He was preaching outdoors, which he hated, but he was preaching to people that nobody else would ever preach to. And it was drawing people to Christ. People were becoming real disciples of Jesus Christ through the Methodist movement. The Methodist movement, by the way, is credited in England from England ever having a bloody civil war like they had in France, okay? English people will tell you this, is that they didn't go to have a civil war because Wesley lifted up enough poor people to where the disconnect was not as bad as it was in France, all right? He was an advocate of abolition of slavery. He did all sorts of major things that changed England and therefore changed a lot of the world as well. But he, once again, never intended to create a church. And finally, though, American Revolution happens, right? And the Church of England is literally the Church of England, okay? The crown, the monarchy is the head of the Church of England. That's the way the Church of England is. And so suddenly the crown doesn't have any control over America anymore, right? And so therefore the Church of England has no presence in America anymore. And for a period of time, American Christians that were connected to the Church of England before, weren't getting baptized, weren't getting communion, you name it, right? And so eventually, we Americans were so independent, we decided to become our own nation, right? And so Wesley decides he needs to do something about it. And so he breaks his own rules, by the way, doing this. But he forms and he gives the Methodists in America the permission to become their own church. All right. He sends over some pastors. He sends over some bishops. That's a loosely term at that point in time, but bishops over to America to form the new church. And in 1784, Christmas 1784, the Methodist Episcopal Church forms, okay? Methodist is about our methods, okay? Episcopal means that it's guided by bishops. That's what the episcopacy means, and of course, church, right? So that's the Methodist Episcopal Church, 1784, so we are 238 years old, right? Something like that. 238 years old. That's the birth of our denomination. And just like it had caught fire in England, it catches fire in America. And the Methodists are on the front lines of America as it spreads westward, okay? You don't need to know American history right now. You got that 7th grade or 8th grade, hopefully. But anyway, point being is it spreads westward as America spreads westward. Same thing, it's reaching people that nobody else in the big churches, the formal stuffy churches, really are reaching, which is the most people, right? A majority of people in America. There are all sorts of offshoots from the Methodist Episcopal Church, by the way. There's German Methodists that kind of form out of this, and there's the Brethren Church that forms out of this, which is also German-speaking. The Evangelical Church comes out of this. So all similar theologies, but not all part of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Also, the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, forms out of this from African Americans who were excluded because of racial issues. The CME, which is the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church now, forms out of this. So if you didn't know it, we're not the only Methodist, okay, United Methodist. Yesterday at a meeting I realized that maybe you don't realize that, but there is the United Methodist Church, the AME, the CME, the Free Methodist Church, Congregational Methodist, British Methodist, amongst others. I don't even know them all, right? We all do come together, by the way, for a World Methodist Council. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. 1840s, as America is really ramping up the division over slavery, the Methodist Episcopal Church splits over slavery. Same thing. We just did it earlier than America. And we formed the Methodist Episcopal Church North, let's say, and then the Methodist Episcopal Church South, because, why not make it shorter? You make it longer. So you make a longer name, right? And so for a long time, the nation was divided from Methodists between North and South. And the Civil War destroys everything, as it does the nation, right? Including the Methodist Episcopal Church, especially the South. It just is decimated by the war. Most Methodist churches today that have been around a while were originally Methodist Episcopal Church South, like this one here. If you look at our stone out there, I think it says that, or something like that. Eventually, the Methodist Episcopal Church North and the Methodist Episcopal Church South come back together again, along with the Protestant Methodist Church in 1939, and they formed the Methodist Church, okay? So they did it right. They made it easier to say, okay? So Methodist Church. So that's the Methodist Church in 1939. They come together as one. And then in 1968, the Methodist Church merges with the Evangelical United Brethren, which was that once upon a time, they've been German Methodists, and we become the United here, Methodist here, United Methodist Church, okay? So the United Methodist Church has existed since 1968, all right? So that's our history in a very, very quick nutshell, but you kind of see that, A, there are a lot of Methodists out there. There's still a lot of Methodists out there. B, we've had this history of coming together and going apart and coming together. That's not out of our normal as Methodists. At the heart, though, we are a people of small groups, accountability, discipleship, things like that, okay? So Not that I'm asking questions, but you kind of get my drift there with the history? Okay? All right. So, I'm going to switch from history then to what we call polity in the United Methodist Church because nothing's ever easy. Okay? So polity is the next part. We Methodists are very methodical. We are very hierarchical. We have 1,000,000,001 ways to organize ourselves, and it's very formal and official, and yet oddly not formal and official at times as well. Okay? So we are a global denomination. Today, about 12 million people or so across the world are United Methodists. We are roughly half in America and half in the rest of the world. Africa is the next largest group, and they will one day be the largest group, I can tell you right now. The Philippines, we are very, very large and prominent in the Philippines. And then across a large part of Europe as well, Germany, Ukraine, I mentioned that earlier, Russia even, areas like that, kind of Central and Eastern Europe especially, are very United Methodist. It's not that the Methodists aren't in other places, but they're British Methodists or other types of Methodists as well, okay? So our 12 million member strong body, obviously it's hard to keep that many people across the world together, so we have different ways that we are organized. Just like the United States has a three-point governance structure, right? You have the executive branch, which is your president, legislative branch, which is the Congress, and judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. We have the same exact system, okay? So our executive branch is what you call the Council of Bishops, all right? The Council of Bishops is what it sounds like. We have bishops in our conferences, and they come together as a body. They don't have a lot of power and authority. They're kind of a guiding body. We don't have a pope, obviously, so there's no one person that gets to dictate things as United Methodists, but they're kind of a guiding force within the United Methodist Church. Our legislative branch, then, is what we call a General Conference. General Conference is made up of delegates from all the annual conferences. They meet every 4 years. They're supposed to meet every 4 years. Meet every 4 years, and that goes back to the very beginning of Methodist. Meeting 4 years was our deal. We call it a quadrennium, okay? Once again, a word that we only use, but a quadrennium. The delegates to annual conference are divided up based on the size of the United Methodist Church and where we are located. So larger conferences have more delegates than smaller conferences and so forth. It's half clergy and half laity. We believe in that very strongly, that we need clergy, but we need laity also. So we believe in a balance in power, okay? But every 4 years they're supposed to meet, and they do the overarching work of the United Methodist Church. They're the only body that has the power to change our constitution, to change our structure, laws, all that kind of stuff, okay? I say they're supposed to because the last time they officially met as a whole in a normal session was 2016. Supposed to meet in 2020, COVID hits, and then 2021 was a reschedule, it hit, and they didn't do it again this year because of COVID. It's still a problem for getting delegates here. And so we're in limbo right now with General Conference. They're going to meet now in 2024, and I'll talk about that later. But once again, they're the only body that really has the power and authority to change Constitution, our Book of Discipline, that kind of stuff, all right? And then our Supreme Court's what we call the Judicial Council. And Judicial Council is made up of 9 people. It rotates from being 5 clergy and 4 laity to 4 clergy and 5 laity every 4 years is the way it's supposed to move. And if I'm right, they're elected by the General Conference. But their job, just like our Supreme Court, is to determine constitutionality. So when something happens in the United Methodist Church that's in question as if it's constitutional or not, then it goes to our Judicial Council. And they've been working overtime for the last few years because of stuff in the United Methodist Church. So that's our big top-level organization. The next below that, something we call jurisdictional conference, okay? So we're organized into jurisdictions, and that's mainly in the United States, by the way. So we're in the South Central jurisdiction. That's all the conferences in Texas, plus Louisiana, New Mexico, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. I see the map in my head, that's why I'm pointing like this, okay? Jurisdictional conference meets after a general conference, every 4 years, but after a general conference. Their primary role is to elect new bishops and then to place those bishops within the conferences. Okay, so our bishops, therefore, usually have 4-year terms that, keep going. Once again, General Conference hasn't met in a regular session since 2016, so no jurisdictional conferences since 2016. I'll talk about that later, but that's one of the many issues that are going on right now in the United Methodist Church. But once again, their main job is to elect bishops and to deploy those bishops to conferences. So below the jurisdictions then are those annual conferences, and that's really the heart of the life of the United Methodist Church. And the reason why I say that is the legal bodies of the United Methodist Church are the annual conferences. The United Methodist Church doesn't exist as a legal entity, all right? There's no patent, there's no copy, there's nothing like that out there. Annual conferences are the legal entities for the United Methodist Church. We're in the Texas Annual Conference, by the way. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But annual conferences then are the forces that drive the life of the United Methodist Church on a day-by-day, year-by-year basis, essentially. They're led by a bishop. Our bishop is Scott Jones. He's been our bishop now for 6 years. Annual conferences meet every year for an annual conference session, hence the term annual conference, right? Ours meets in 2 weeks, May 29th through June 1st or something like that, I think, in Houston. Let's talk about ours, the Texas Annual Conference. Imagine a Texas map, okay? If you know where Matagorda is on the coast, it's about halfway down the coastline. That's the southernmost point of our conference. It shoots up. It goes about an hour west of Bryan College Station area, Lexington, Texas, where I used to serve, right? And then it kind of balloons over. It catches Fairfield. It catches Canton. Does not get to Paris, but eventually gets to Texarkana. Then goes down the Louisiana border all the way down to the Golden Triangle, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange area. So Houston, obviously, is a big part of that. Lufkin, Nacogdoches, Tyler, Longview, Texarkana, Bryan College Station, Huntsville, kind of the big primary areas of our annual conference. Our annual conference is then broken up into 9 districts, by the way. We're the Northwest District of the Texas Annual Conference. Once again, the conference is run by a bishop. Bishop, they're the guiding force of the conference, I guess you could say. Bishop's main role is to deploy clergy. He's the one that, in our case, he has the power to place clergy where they are, amongst other things, but that's kind of his biggest role as a clergy part, about putting clergy into churches, amongst other things. The annual conference itself, the body that meets, which we're meeting in 2 weeks, is once again made up of half clergy, half laity. Every clergy person has a matching lay person that goes to conference with them. I am your clergy delegate. Tyler is your clergy delegate. Gabe Sansing matches me as a lay delegate. Dee Dee Looney matches Tyler as our interim other lay delegate. And then Stephanie Griffin and Les Griffin, right here, they serve as district delegates. So every retired clergy person still has the power to vote at annual conference, but they don't have a church to put a lay person there, so the district matches a lay person there. So that's why Stephanie and Les are lay delegates. So when we go to conference here in 2 weeks, I'm a delegate, Tyler's a delegate, Dee Dee's a delegate, Gabe Sansing is a delegate, Stephanie and Les are delegates as well, okay? We do the business of the annual conference year to year. We do budgeting, we approve budgets, on my end in clergy and Tyler's end in clergy, we approve new clergy to be moved up in the process in the system. We do all those kinds of things, basically, as a life of the annual conference. Anyway, that's kind of the gist of the annual conference there. So, like I mentioned below that is districts. The districts kind of handle the more localized regional influence. The Northwest District is Tyler, Athens, Palestine. If you imagine that, that's kind of the best way to imagine, or Tyler, Palestine, Athens. Kind of imagine those geographic areas. That's our district. Our district superintendent is Charles Anderson. District superintendents administer the life of the district. Obviously, they are clergy elders like myself. And then the heart then of the United Methodist Church is a local church, is what y'all are, right? And so, in the end, if the local church doesn't exist, there's no point of having a United Methodist Church. So, we believe strongly that the life of our denomination is in the local church. I preach about it every Sunday. Y'all are an amazing congregation. You're very missional minded. You are by and far the most well-connected to your community of church that I've ever served and probably ever really been around. I mean, I could talk you up, but you know how you are as a church. This is an amazing congregation. You exemplify the life of being a United Methodist, and you should be applauded for that. Organizationally, I am the head of the congregation. That's my role as your senior pastor, and I do my day-to-day administration of our congregation. I do it with the consultation of our leadership team, which is really our body of laity that helps guide our church as well. We also have a team that helps nominate and deploy leaders for our church called our development team, amongst many other teams and bodies of our church. And then, of course, we have amazing staff here at the church that helps us live our lives as well. But that's kind of the main things about our organization, right? So you see that there's a lot of layers, right? A lot of confusion, a lot of interlocking pieces. And the last 2 years, because of COVID, has really thrown a lot of that off as well. In fact, when we meet an annual conference in 2 weeks, the first time we met in person in 3 years, right? And so even that's kind of an unusual thing. By the way, and I didn't write this down, but in case you don't know, my existence and Tyler's existence is based on the life of our bishop, right? We're appointed to you year by year. We serve a year after year term. Annual conference is when our new year starts, by the way. So Tyler and I will start a new year at annual conference here. But yeah, we serve at the discretion of the bishop is how we operate as well. So, okay. A little bit about money. So we Methodists have something called apportionments, and hopefully you've heard of that, but if not, apportionments are basically our tithe back to the United Methodist Church. We give a certain amount of money back to the Texas Annual Conference to help the conference do its business, and a certain back to the United Methodist Church, the global church, to help the global church do its business. Our apportionments go everything from helping with health care and pensions for wonderful clergy like myself, to paying for district superintendents and bishops, to doing mission advocacy work in Africa, you name it. There's a lot of things that our apportionments pay for. I say it's a tithe. That's not 10%. It's like 7%. It's a very complicated formula that I dislike greatly, but nonetheless, that's the way we do it. And so we pay back our apportionments to the United Methodist Church or the conference, and then it goes off to the United Methodist Church from there. That's a big part of who we are. It's our commitment. Just like I tell you every year, especially at stewardship season, that you commit to the church and you're giving as part of that, we give back as well as our commitment to being part of our denomination, okay? And one more thing, and this is probably going to surprise some of you, but it shouldn't, but I guarantee you will. We don't own our property, okay? We don't own, this is not Lindale First United Methodist Church property here, okay, where I'm standing, all right? United Methodist Church has something called the Trust Clause. This existed before we were a denomination. This is John Wesley. He put a lot of money into creating these bands and classes societies, even put money into building buildings for them, and then people were taking them away from him because they got mad at him for something, right? So, long story short, our property does not belong to us because the Texas Annual Conference is the legal entity. It belongs to the Texas Annual Conference. That's really why we have conferences in the first place, because Texas laws are different than Louisiana laws and different than New Mexico and so forth and so on. But our property in the end is owned by the United Methodist Church, with the Texas Annual Conference really being the true owner of our property. Yes, you pay for it. You're paying for your electricity right now. You're paying for air conditioning that's never going to keep up because it's too hot outside right now. You paid for these buildings to be built. You're paying for loans on this and that, but we don't own it, all right? And I know that some of you have probably been in the United Methodist Church for years and maybe don't fully understand that, but that's a big part of this. We do not own our property. And if you want to know, this has gone to the Supreme Court. It is very legal, okay? That's just the way we are. We're not the only ones, but that's the way we operate as a denomination, okay? And that obviously plays in the part about who we are and what we do as United Methodists, okay? A few other Methodist things. We believe in being connectional. Connectionalism is a word that does not exist on Microsoft Word, but it is a word nonetheless. Connectionalism is at the heart of who we are as United Methodists. It goes back to Wesley. He was all about connecting Christians together, that they can live out their lives as Christians. And so we believe in being connectional. The reason why Tyler and I, are appointed the way we are is because we're a connectional system, meaning that when I am needed elsewhere, I'm connected elsewhere. And when someone else is needed to be here, they're connected here, and so forth. But we believe that we do our lives as United Methodists together. Now, that is biblical, right? I mean, that's Book of Acts, my friends. I mean, that's just the way we are, and we live that out as a connectional church. I don't like non-denominational churches, I'll be honest with you, because I believe in connection, because that's biblical, all right? And that's something powerful about being a denomination that believes in being connected together, because that's who we are as Christians, right? And it's how we are to live out our lives as United Methodists. Of course, that means that when things go on in parts of the world that maybe aren't quite right, it affects us, because when you're connected, right? But know that we are very connectional. It's at the heart of who we are. It's at the heart of Christianity, relationships, family, connection. That's who we are as United Methodists. Methodists as whole, okay? We also believe in balancing ourselves as far as living out our lives as disciples. So we believe in personal holiness, meaning you're supposed to commit yourselves to prayer and being present in the church and giving back to the church and serving and being a witness in the world, which also means you're supposed to be socially holy, meaning you're supposed to be connected to the world and serving in the world and offering Jesus Christ to the world. That's what disciple means. So we believe in being balanced in our lives as followers of Jesus Christ. We don't emphasize one or the other. It's all important. Service, food pantry, we care, you name it, that's important, and so is being in church on Sunday morning. That's important as well. Make sense? Okay. Page 1 is done. Okay. I hope it gives you a brief glimpse into what's about everything else I'm about to talk about, okay? History is important. Our organization is important. Connectionalism is important. Apportionments are important. The trust clause is important. All these things are important about what comes after this, all right? So let me take a drink of my water here. I'm going to move from talking out here out of my brain and reading my notes now, because I don't want to say anything incorrect here. All right? In the end, human sexuality is a big part of what's going on in the United Methodist Church and what our current debate is about, okay? You've read this. I've told you this more than once. In fact, I told you this 3 years ago, but I'm going to reread what I've written in the past here, all right? For 50 years, the United Methodist Church has been wrestling with the issue of human sexuality, especially in the context of matters regarding LGBTQ persons. Our Book of Discipline states that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Because of this, the discipline further states that self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. And ceremonies that celebrate homosexual union shall not be conducted by our ministers and shall not be conducted in our churches. However, the discipline also says that all persons are of sacred worth and all people may attend its worship services, participate in its programs, receive the sacraments, and become members in any local church in the connection. All right. Self-avowed practicing homosexuals cannot be clergy persons in the United Methodist Church per our Book of Discipline, cannot have same-sex weddings within the context of a United Methodist Church building or property. Pastors cannot officiate over those things. You know that's not all working that way, but that's our official vow, okay? Our official vow is actually correct. I take vows to uphold this discipline, okay? I mean, 8 years ago, when I was ordained, I took vows to uphold this discipline. Well, that was different, but anyway, officially 8 years ago. And when you take vows to be part of United Methodist Church, although you don't hear those words, you're vowing to be a part of this as well, okay? So that is our stance on human sexuality. Whether or not you agree with these statements, this has been the United Methodist Church's official stance for almost the entire life of our denomination. 1968 we're formed, 1972 this begins to be our official stance. For every general conference over the last 4 decades, our denomination's stance on human sexuality has been debated and fought over, with some supporting it while others wishing to change it. In 2015, the United States Supreme Court legalized same-gender marriage in all 50 states. Again, this resulted in pressure for the United Methodist Church to adapt its rules. During the General Conference in 2016, it was decided through the guidance of our bishops to form a commission to discuss this matter and to try and find a way to eliminate the constant debate, because it has been constant debate every 4 years for 40 years, almost 50 now. This Commission on a Way Forward, as it was called, was a bipartisan group of 32 laity and clergy that met 9 times over 2 years to try and come up with some solutions to move the church forward to unity over the matter. Additionally, it was decided to call a special general conference in February of 2019 with the human sexuality issue to be the only thing under consideration, which it did. At that general conference, a plan known as the Traditional Plan was adopted. The Traditional Plan affirmed the current language of our discipline that expresses that all persons are of sacred worth and are not to be rejected or condemned, and that sexual relations are affirmed only within the context of a monogamous heterosexual marriage. Homosexual unions are not to be conducted by our clergy or in our churches, and self-avowed homosexuals are not to be ordained or appointed to serve and minister as ministers in the United Methodist Church. During this general conference, there was also legislation that was adopted to help churches who feel that they could not continue in this path to move on or disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church to be able to do so more easily. Okay. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. Never mind. All right. You probably got questions going. That's okay. We'll get there. So the traditional plan passed with a majority, but was not a strong majority. And so the matter was far from being settled. And in many ways, the tensions were escalated. So I will point to 2019, February, as being the moment when the tensions probably went to a fever pitch within our denomination. COVID kind of, like everybody else's life, has thrown that off, but that is where we were in 2019 and still are, obviously, today. So some Christians, some United Methodists emphasize the sacred worth of human beings and that always should come first. Thus, there have been progressive leaders who have violated the Book of Discipline to pursue justice for the LGBTQ persons. A few conferences even made moves in this direction. Others advanced for change while refraining from violations. I will tell you, clergy have officiated at same-sex unions. Churches have opened their doors to such things. There are self-avowed practicing homosexual people serving as clergy in our denomination. We have a bishop in the West that is of that standing. And we're connectional, right? We take vows. So, I mean, that's where we are right now as a denomination. That has not occurred in our conference, by the way, but that's because we're the Texas Annual Conference, all right? Because of the nature of our polity, how we're organized, there is no way to enforce a discipline from one annual conference to another. And many conferences are actively keeping charges for disobedience in abeyance for the time being or actively dismissing them. So, because the Texas Annual Conference is its own legal entity, we have no power or authority to tell somebody in another conference what to do. Even our Judicial Council, which is our Supreme Court, when they make rulings, there is no way to enforce them. We do not have a United Methodist Army. We do have a UM Army, but that's not what they're for. We don't have a United Methodist military, let's put it that, or police force, right? In the end, it's all about vows and upholding vows and connections and all that kind of stuff. That's the power of it all. So, and to be honest with you, the reason why we're that way is because when we came together in 1939, racism was rampant in our denomination. And Southerners didn't want Northerners telling them how to do things and vice versa. And so we came together and created this system that is now unattainable at this moment, okay? At least to a certain degree. Thus, there are many others who feel the United Methodist Church is no longer viable as it currently stands, okay? So that's where we are for the moment, okay? I'm going to stop for a second now and change directions to talk about disaffiliation. I mentioned that a second ago. Disaffiliation is where a congregation moves from the United Methodist Church to another denomination or becomes independent, okay? Up until 3 years ago, it really wasn't a thing. There actually is a clause in our Book of Discipline that's 70 years old that allowed for it, but it was never really used because it was never fleshed out. It never had a reason to. But in 2019, they created a new well, let me read my notes. Never mind. Here we go. Let's do this. This is all legalese, okay? I'm going to tell you right now, so do your best to follow along here. At the 2019 Special General Conference, a process to exit the denomination was adopted, outlined in paragraph 2553 of the United Methodist Book of Discipline. By the way, our Book of Discipline, which is our guiding document to how we exist as United Methodists, is broken down into paragraphs. So if you want to find something in the Book of Discipline, you have to know what paragraph it's in. Good luck. 2553, though, is the paragraph that we're talking about right now. As I mentioned, it was created specifically because of the current disagreement on human sexuality. So here is the reading of 2553 in its entirety. Okay. Disaffiliation of a local church over issues related to human sexuality. Basis. Because of the current deep conflict within the United Methodist Church around issues of human sexuality, a local church shall have a limited right, under the provisions of this paragraph, to disaffiliate from the denomination for reasons of conscience regarding a change in the requirements and provisions of the Book of Discipline related to the practice of homosexuality or the ordination or marriage of self-avowed practicing homosexuals as resolved and adopted by the 2019 General Conference, or the actions or inactions of its annual conference related to these issues which follow. By the way, this was created for more progressive congregations initially that didn't feel that they could continue with the United Methodist Church. And it's flipped now, but nonetheless, that was what this was originally created for. All right? Time limits. The choice by a local church to disaffiliate with the United Methodist Church under this paragraph shall be made in sufficient time for the process for exiting the denomination to be complete prior to December 31st, 2023. End of next year, okay? At end of next year, this paragraph no longer exists, unless the Judicial Council says otherwise. The provisions of paragraph 2553 expire on December 31st, 2023, and shall not be used after that date. Decision-making process. The church conference shall be conducted in accordance with paragraph 248 and shall be held within 120 days after the district superintendent calls for the church conference. In addition to the provisions of 246.8, special attention shall be made to give broad notice to the full professing membership of the local church regarding the time and place of a church conference called for this purpose, and to use all means necessary, including electronic communication where possible, to communicate. The decision to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church must be approved by a 2/3 majority, okay, vote of the professing members of the local church present at church conference. So if you get to the point of disaffiliation, you have to call a church conference. The district superintendent has to do that calling, by the way, but it gets to that person. You have to have it within a certain amount of time to call it. You have to do every means that you possibly can to call that. So from the pulpit, by email, by letter, by Pony Express, whatever the case may be, all right? And the body that makes up that majority is whoever shows up at the meeting, all right? It's not whoever's on a roll, because Aunt Jenny in West Virginia is still on a rolls, okay? I don't know if that's Aunt Jenny or not, but I'm being serious about that. So it's 2/3 of whoever is present in that meeting, okay? That's why you have plenty of time. You called it, okay? All right. Process following decision to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. If the church conference votes to disaffiliate from the UMC, the terms and conditions for that disaffiliation shall be established by the Board of Trustees of the applicable annual conference. So our conference has already created those rules. I'll talk about those in a second. With the advice of the Cabinet, the annual conference treasurer, the annual conference benefits officer, the director of connectional ministries, and the annual conference chancellor. The terms and conditions, including the effective date of disaffiliation, shall be memorialized in a binding disaffiliation agreement between the annual conference and the trustees of the local church, acting on behalf of the members. That agreement must be consistent with the following provisions. A, standard terms of the disaffiliation agreement. The General Council on Finance and Administration shall develop a standard form for disaffiliation agreements under this paragraph to protect the United Methodist Church as set forth in paragraph 807.9. The agreement shall conclude a recognition of the validity and applicability of paragraph 2501. This is why I didn't summarize this, by the way, because I can't. Notwithstanding the release of property therefrom, annual conferences may develop additional standard terms that are not inconsistent with the standard form of this paragraph. Apportionments. The local church shall pay any unpaid apportionments for the 12 months prior to disaffiliation, as well as an additional 12 months of apportionments. So, if your church votes to disaffiliate under this paragraph, you have to have your apportionments paid for the previous year all the way 100%, and the current year paid 100% as well. All right? Once again, that's part of our connectional nature. That's part of who we are as United Methodists. C, property. The disaffiliating local church shall have the right to retain its real and personal, tangible, and intangible property. All transfers of property shall be made prior to disaffiliation. All costs for transfer of title or of legal work shall be borne by the disaffiliating local church. So if you disaffiliate, you follow all the rules, you get your property, okay? That's how this works. Pension liabilities. The local church shall contribute withdrawal liability in an amount equal to its pro rata share of any aggregate unfunded pension obligations to the annual conference. The General Board of Pension and Health Benefits shall determine the aggregate funding obligations of the annual conference using market factors similar to a commercial annuity provider, from which the annual conference will determine the local church's share. What that means is, you pay part of my pension, right? You pay part of Tyler's pension, Rick's pension, Wayne Flowers' pension, Paul Keithley's pension. That's the current pension process, by the way, since 2007, okay? Plus Roger Clayton's pension, if any other associate pastors in that time, you part of that pension, okay? And if you know pensions, they're not fully funded ever, right? They're always, it's like Social Security, it's always a moving target, right? So to disaffiliate, you have to pay your congregation's current share of your unfunded pension liability, all right? And it's pro rata, market, yada, 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 all right? Long story short, the Texas Annual Conference's total unfunded pension liability as of right now is about $65 million. So every church then has a portion of that. It depends on the size of your church, the clergy, obviously, more importantly, all those kinds of things, okay? You want to know how much that is? It's roughly 4 to 7 times the amount of your current apportion amount. They don't have anything to do with each other. That's just how it works. Ours are $48,000 a year. So somewhere between $200,000 and $350,000 would be our apportionment, unfunded pension liability. That's a rough number. It's a guess, but that's about as close as I can give you right now, okay? All right. Other liabilities, the local church shall satisfy all other debts, loans, and liabilities, or assign and transfer them to its new entity prior to disaffiliation, which means if you have a debt, you can't give it to United Methodist Church as you leave, okay? You got to take care of it. Payment terms, payment shall occur prior to the effective date of departure, which means you have to give all of that money right away. You can't currently pay it out over time. Disaffiliating churches continue as plan sponsors of the General Board of Pension and Health Benefits Plan. I'm not going to read all that, actually. Point being is that the pension stuff still, my pension keeps going. Okay, that's what it means, or Rick's or whoever's, all right? Once the disaffiliating local church has reimbursed the applicable annual conference for all funds due under the agreement and provided that there are no other outstanding liabilities or claims against the United Methodist Church as a result of the disaffiliation, in consideration of the provisions of this paragraph, the applicable annual conference shall release any claims that it may have under paragraph 2501 and other paragraphs of the Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, commonly referred to as the trust clause or under the agreement, okay? Let me explain to that how it matters to our conference here, okay? At least how our rules here. So this paragraph 2553 was created 3 years ago. In 2020, our conference, our trustees of our conference created a plan of how to enact this plan, okay? And there's a 7-step process for a church to disaffiliate based on paragraph 2553 and how the annual conference has interpreted that paragraph. All right, so number one. First, members of the local church must complete an appropriate process of discernment. The determination of whether a process is appropriate is made by the church's district superintendent. So a church, their leadership council, their leadership team, their church council, whomever decides that it's time to discern, not disaffiliate, to discern whether or not they're going to disaffiliate. They contact the district superintendent. The district superintendent comes and meets with the leadership of the church. And from there, it's determined how that process should be followed out. Okay? That's step number one. Step number 2, after the local church nears completion of the process of discernment, the annual conference will calculate apportionment and unfunded pension liability estimates for that local church. What that means is a local church cannot find out exactly how much they owe until they have begun the disaffiliation process. So don't ask me here in a minute how much we owe, okay, because I do not know and we cannot know currently. All right? Got it? Nod your heads. Okay, all right. The local church, this is number 3, the local church may vote to move forward with the disaffiliation process. To move forward, disaffiliation must be affirmed. I'm going to say something in a minute, explain it in a second, okay? Be affirmed by a simple majority under paragraph 2548.2. I have not told you what that means yet. I will in a minute. Or a 2/3 majority under paragraph 2553, which I just told you about, okay? Of a duly called church conference. Once again, you have to call it the right amount of time. It's whoever shows up to that conference, et cetera, et cetera. All right? The local church must pay in full the previous year's apportionments and the current year's apportionments. I just told you all about that. The local church must pay in full the unfunded pension liability as calculated by the TAC, Texas Annual Conference Board of Pensions, in accordance with Westpath's guidance. Westpath is the entity that manages our pension plan, by the way. The value... Okay, I'm not going to read that part anyway. It explains what I already told you. Step number 6, the local church must complete all forms in accordance with the GCFA's disaffiliation guidance. You have to fill out a bunch of paperwork. Obviously, we're Methodists. You got to fill out paperwork, okay? And step number 7, after all the foregoing steps have been completed, the TAC may vote to release the local church from any obligation under the trust clause in paragraph 2503 in accordance with the then applicable book of discipline. Please note that the TAC does not meet randomly for such votes. This is my own words, by the way, but instead they must be scheduled annually. Okay, so after your church goes through all of this and you pay all your money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you still aren't disaffiliated until the annual conference votes on you, all right? Annual conference meets once a year, 2 weeks. Now, they can call special conferences for just these purposes, but it doesn't happen every week, right? So that also is part of what plays in here. For reference, by the way, 3 churches in our conference have disaffiliated already. This is a year or so ago. One was very conservative in the Katy area. They are now affiliating with the Free Methodist Church, another denomination. One was more progressive in the nature. They are now part of the United Church of Christ, which is a more progressive denomination. And one small church became an independent church, okay? And they did it all wrong, by the way, but that's their... I'm not talking about the independent part, although I disagree with that completely. They just didn't handle the process properly, but that's where they are. When we meet in 2 weeks, we're going to vote on 3 more churches. I don't know who they are. They won't tell us yet because they don't want us full of more anxiety than we need to be, okay? There may be a special called session of annual conference later this year to vote on more disaffiliations. That is a maybe, all right? So, essentially under this process of 2553, a church becomes an independent congregation and then aligns with another denomination. So if you go through the 2553 process, you can either become independent, you do become independent, period, and then either you stay that way or you align with another denomination. Like I said, one became a Free Methodist, one became a United Church of Christ. You know, you go whichever direction your church so chooses. By the way, you can't just show up at the Free Methodist Church and say, hey, I want to be your buddy now, okay? Or you name it, right? You also had to be talking to other denominations, but that's another story for another day. All right? Add mud to the water. In 1948, another disaffiliation path was created in the book of discipline. 1948, by the way, we're the Methodist Church. We weren't the United Methodist Church. That's how old this is, okay? It's not specific to the issue of human sexuality. It was created for a rationale that sometimes a United Methodist Church is in a place where being a United Methodist Church is no longer functional for its mission, and therefore they could pick up and transfer to another evangelical denomination, okay, which meant something different in 1948 than it does now, but that's just what the language is, all right? The paragraph is this long compared to the last one that I just read was this long, okay? It was never like flushed out because it was never intended to, right? But it exists, right? And so it's being fleshed out right now. As of this moment, it is an option for a church in the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. The voting threshold on that is a simple majority, 50% plus one person, right? Very different than 2/3 majority. You have to align with another evangelical denomination. You don't become independent under this plan, right? Or this provision. It has to be, you immediately have to align with another church, and they basically transfer your property from UMC to the other denomination as it may exist. I'll leave that for later. Okay. Anyway. It's under question about how this process works. It's under question about if it can be utilized at all. Our Supreme Court Judicial Council is going to be talking about that later this year. But as of this moment, this is how it exists, okay? Because it was never intended to be what it is right now, but it exists in our doctrine. Okay, so few points. Once again, 2553, the one that I read that was 23,000 words long, expires at the end of year next year. 2/3 majority by a church or a church conference. To pass that has to be approved by the conference as well. You got to pay a bunch of money. Okay, makes sense? Best of it can possibly make sense there. All right, I'm going to move back to my podium now. All right. So we did not have a conference, general conference in 2020 because of COVID. Delay to 2021 did not happen. Delay to this year did not happen as well. All right, so we're now down to 2024 being our next general conference. To muddy the water even more, all right? The question is that going to be a 2024 general conference, or is that going to be 2020 now in 2024? That matters because the general conference is made up of delegates based on the size of the denomination at the point it was supposed to happen, right? So is it going to be the way the church looked 2 years ago, or is it how it's going to look in 2 years, right? That could vastly change what may happen in 2 years at General Conference. In either direction, I'm going to tell you right now, okay, just to let you know, all right? But we do not currently have a General Conference. We haven't had one, we had one in 2019, but it was only about one thing. The actual body that makes things happen has not existed for 6 years now. We were never intended to be able to live this way. Quite frankly, we're breaking our own discipline by even being at this point because there was never any provision to delay a general conference, all right? But nobody envisioned where we are right now as a globe at the moment. Okay, so I bring up 2020 General Conference because after 2019, some very wise Christians Methodists said, we need to now figure out a better way, all right? And so in early 2020, a group of Methodists from all sorts of walks of life, from all different sorts of advocacy groups, if you can imagine either end of the spectrum, they all existed in this group. And they came up with a proposal. It was called the Protocol for Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation, because we can't do anything short. Or the protocol, okay? It was mediated, by the way, by some big mediator in, I think, New York City that does this for a living, okay? And he did it for free because he believed in this, right? The plan would create a new traditional denomination. It would give that denomination $25 million as a seed money to form that denomination. It would also set aside some other smaller parts of money for other denominations to form as well. It could be more progressive. It could be a denomination of Methodists that really like country music. I don't know, but whatever the case may be. Once again, this is a proposal, okay? It hasn't happened. I'm just telling you because it is important to this. Under the terms of the protocol legislation, central conferences, annual conferences, and local churches could choose to align with one of the new denominations. If they did so, they would be released from the trust clause of the Church and so retain all their assets, properties, and buildings without charge. Okay? Remember, $250,000+ over here versus $0 over here, okay? But once again, this is just a proposal, okay? And without all that long process over here. So you get all your property and you do it without having to pay a bunch of money. Additionally, as they align with a new church, they would not have to pay I just said all those things. Okay, all right, so. All right, rather, payment for future pension liabilities would continue to be made by a congregation on a monthly or annual basis, just as they come due now. So they would just keep paying their pension liabilities to whatever new entity existed, okay? The terms would only apply if local churches align with one of the new denominations, so you had to go with one of these new denominations that would be created out of this proposal. churches that choose to withdraw from the UMC church and become independent would not receive these benefits, okay? So you'd have to pay your money instead, all right? The process outlined in the protocol legislation is the least complex and most economical pathway for a church to take once it decides it wants to separate from the United Methodist Church. The proposed voting percentage threshold is 57% of the voting body of the annual conference. Not 50 plus 1, but not 67. That was their middle number, okay, because we like balance as United Methodist, okay? 57%. Let me clarify that. That's actual annual conference. So annual conferences could disaffiliate and join whatever new denomination by the 57% threshold. I should be clear about that. That's slightly different there. Churches in the annual conference, if the disaffiliation were approved, could remain in the United Methodist Church. So if a conference had disaffiliated and a church wanted to be a UMC still, they could then remove themselves and stay with the United Methodist Church, okay, by aligning themselves through a vote. I bring that up because it hasn't happened. We didn't have a general conference in 2020 or 2021 or 2022. It was heavily, heavily supported by the vast majority of Methodist leaders 2 years ago. We're not as nice as we were 2 years ago. So I can't tell you what will happen in 2 years if it will even make it to general conference, but it is still on the table. And it has to be considered because that's a whole other part of this process, okay? One more muddy thing, all right. Because we have not had general conference since 2016, we have not had jurisdictional conferences since 2016, right? I told you earlier, that's the body that elects bishops and deploys them, right? But we haven't had one for 6 years. We've had bishops die. We've had bishops get too old to keep serving conferences. So across our denomination, especially in the United States of America, there are situations where bishops are serving 2, even 3 conferences at the same time. Imagine serving one conference like ours that has 1,000 active clergy, almost 700 active churches, okay? And then double or triple that. So, the Council of Bishops this year has asked to be able to call special jurisdictional conferences to elect bishops and to deploy them. But we haven't had a general conference, right? So already it's not per our book of discipline. It's already a break in our book of discipline. They are saying that because the episcopacy as it now currently stands is not sustainable, which is a book of discipline thing, that's how they're able to do this. The Judicial Council probably in the next week or two is going to rule on whether or not they can have jurisdictional conferences. What that means to us is our current Bishop Scott Jones turns 68 this month. That is the retirement age for for bishops. Sorry, not clergy, we're 72, but 68 for bishops. If we have a jurisdictional conference this year, he has to retire. And so we would get a new bishop, which is even more chaos. I'm sorry, but that's how I personally feel about it. I'll take what I know over what I don't know, but that's my feeling. But that's the question in our conference as well, okay? By the way, I've heard from a few of you think, oh, hey, Bishop Jones is retiring, right? That's not quite the case, all right? He's been talking about this for years because he knew he would have to retire at the next general conference, but he thought it would be 2024, okay? That's why everything is so muddy right now, okay? But if we were to get a new bishop this year, a lot of churches in our conference are really even more anxious over what might happen. And I'm being honest with you, okay? They have a right to feel that way. We have bishops in our denomination that are not handling the situation very well. It's the truth, all right? There's a conference where the bishop won't let any churches disaffiliate right now, even though the rules are right there in front of them, all right? Other conferences have created a lot extra measures that are making it really hard on churches. There have been some appointments of churches that are questionable at best from bishops, and so it worries people, and it's realistic worry, right? So that also is a play there. It's just reality there. You have to acknowledge the truth of the matter, okay? All right. But wait, there's more, okay? So you probably have heard there is a new denomination now. So 2 weeks ago, on May 1st, the Global Methodist Church officially launched. Yes, the Global Methodist Church, okay? So they've been a working process for years, led by multiple more conservative, more traditional groups within the United Methodist Church. They weren't going to launch until a general conference was going to happen, but they got to the point where after this one was delayed this year, they felt they could no longer wait. Obviously, they never got to the protocol to get their $25 million, all that kind of stuff, right? So they're launching on their own, somewhat as a shot in the dark, I guess you could say. I don't know, it depends on how you look at it. The Global Methodist Church is a more traditional-minded Methodist denomination. Their doctrines are very similar to what ours are currently as United Methodists. Now, the organization is very, very different. It's much less top-heavy. Let me back up. It will be much less top-heavy. They haven't had a general conference yet. There's no bishops yet. They're being run by a transitional leadership team right now, which was, they created on their own. So it's just a group of people, pastors and laity, that are kind of running this denomination right now. Their plan is to have doctrines that are like the current United Methodist Church. Their plan is to have a less structured hierarchy of their denomination. There will be no trust clause, so churches will own their own property no matter who they are as part of the Global Methodist Church. There will be apportionments. There'll be less overall because they're looking at it in a different way. Clergy deployment will be different in the Global Methodist Church. Churches will have more say-so over who they get as clergy and when they can let clergy go. But a bishop still has authority to make those appointments in the end. Clergy will look differently. Education requirements will be different. The process to become a clergy person will be different in this denomination. Conferences will be different. Districts will be different. There won't be district superintendents. There will be presiding elders, which is what we used to call district superintendents. So basically in this concept, Doug Baker at Marvin United Methodist Church, the largest church in our area, he could be a presiding elder where he would have authority over certain other churches within his area. That's just an example. It's not going to happen. I'm just using that as the idea, right? But no more districts as we know them. Accountability, though, is a big deal, all right? It's going to be much more stringent, accountable system under the Global Methodist Church. If you vow to be a part of it, you're going to be a part of it, and if you don't, you're no longer a Global Methodist, whether it's a church or a pastor or a member, okay? So accountability is going to be much more stringent. Bishops won't exist for a lifetime. They will eventually have to retire. Anyway, there's a lot of other differences, but that's some of the key things that are different about the Global Methodist Church and how they will be theoretically as they progress. They will have a general conference next year at some point. It's not even scheduled yet, where they're going to flesh out all of this. But right now, it is not determined. I've got documents in front of me that say what they plan on doing, but I can't tell you that this is going to be this a year from now or whatever for the Global Methodist Church, okay? So what might happen to the United Methodist Church? These are just possibilities, options out there. I don't even know what time it is, by the way. What time is it? Whew, over an hour of me talking. Sheesh. All right, what might happen to the United Methodist Church? There could be a large split in our denomination. Maybe a large group going to the Global Methodist Church, or maybe a large group going to many different denominations, okay? Probably mostly traditional-minded clergy and churches, but progressive churches as well. As I mentioned, one in our conference already has left. Could be a smaller split. Maybe the Global Methodist Church doesn't really catch fire, and it's a smaller group that breaks off. United Methodist Church in Africa is a growing part of our denomination right now. They are more traditional, even than the traditional people in this church building right now. They're more traditional than you are, but they believe in the United Methodist Church more strongly than any of you do as well. And I can tell you right now, that cross and flame is their life as far as they're concerned. So for the most part, they're hanging on for the moment, even if their doctrines or their theologies might be in the direction that they are. But they may have more say-so in 2 years, depending on what size our conference is in 2 years, and depending on what year number is beside that conference, right? Regional conferences might be created, so a plan is out there where the United Methodist Church may create another tier of layers of organization of regions America, Africa, and so forth. And those regions may be given power to adjust certain aspects of the Book of Discipline to meet the needs of those regions. That's a possibility out there. There might be a slow movement of our denomination in certain directions, much like the Episcopal Church has done, the Presbyterian Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or the United Methodist Church might look very similar in 2 years than it does right now, okay? That's every direction that I can think of at this moment. But the point being is that it's very uncertain, all right? Very uncertain. So what about our conference, the Texas Annual Conference? You may have heard that there was a proposal for our conference, the Texas Annual Conference, to disaffiliate as one body. The concept would have theoretically made it financially more feasible to disaffiliate for a larger group of churches, meaning that local churches would have to pay less money. However, last week, this proposal was ruled unconstitutional by the Judicial Council, okay? So if you heard that a few weeks ago, it's no longer a thing. A conference cannot disaffiliate on their own currently. Now, if General Conference, when they meet in 2 years, creates a process for that to happen, then they could, but it does not exist right now, all right? The main thing for our conference to note is that our conference is currently doing everything possible to be gracious to churches in whichever direction they are headed. So they've created the 7 steps that I talk about disaffiliation. They're trying to create every avenue to allow churches to be able to do that if they so want to do so. They're trying to offer support as much as they can right now, trying to hold on to the United Methodist Church as well. They're trying to be as broad as we can be in our conference and trying to move forward. What about our congregation, First United Methodist Church, Lindale? I'm going to start by saying that you remember our mission and vision. Our mission is to... You see, 4 years ago, you couldn't have said that. And it's true. But you hear it every Sunday now, and so you hear it, right? Our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. 99% of the stuff I just talked about for the last hour and 10 minutes is not in that, right? But that's important. Our vision, I don't expect you to quote this. I will quote it for you, okay? The vision of First United Methodist Church Lindale is to grow in our love of God and others through loving God, which is our worship, through our life together, which is our fellowship together, through our, oh my gosh, I should have just not done this, right? Love God, love others, life together, live it. Love God is our worship, love others is our service, life together is our fellowship, live it is our witness. There you go, I got it, okay. Yay! The point being is that our vision revolves around our worship, our small group life, our fellowship, our service, and of course our witness in the community for Jesus Christ, okay? Once again, that's our vision, and 99% of what I talked about is not necessarily a part of that. That's who we are. We are the hub of ministry in our community. And I don't care what any other church says, they can't claim that. They can't. Because, I mean, literally, on any given day, there are addicts being cared for. There are people being fed. There are being people clothed. There's health care. There's mental health care. Scouts are here. There are women being trained here. There are kids being brought up in Jesus Christ over here, okay? Pooing all of y'all, okay? But it's true. I mean, we are the hub of ministry in this community. It's our feather in our cap. This is our DNA, all right? And if we didn't exist, people would be starving, people would not have health care, mental health care, addicts would not have, nobody else in this town is going to support the AA, by the way, I'm going to tell you right now, all right? It is a truth. Scouts, nobody in this town is going to support them as well. I know that because I know our churches and our pastor and our clergy. It's just reality, okay? This is who we are. Those things are who we are as First United Methodist Church in Lindale first, all right? And we need to remember who we are as we move forward. I cannot emphasize that enough, okay? Because if we lose sight of that, we miss the whole point of being the church that we are, all right? Okay. So what about disaffiliation? If our church were to disaffiliate, then why now versus later? And I'm not saying that we are to disaffiliate. I'm saying if we were. Why now versus later? So the argument for now is the possibility of a new bishop for our conference, as I mismentioned, that may alter our ability to disaffiliate in the future. And the current Book of Discipline rules will expire next year. And some are just ready to move on, okay? And I've talked to enough people that are just ready to move on, okay? Maybe later then is another option, next year, 2023. Once again, the deadline for the current paragraph, or 2553, isn't until the end of the year next year, so it's still a year and a half away. And we'll give time for the global Methodist Church, if that were to where the direction this church would go, to become more fully developed, okay? How many of you have smartphones in here? How many of you don't have smartphones in here? Okay, more than a dozen people. How many of you in 2007 got the first smartphone when it came out? Joe Rhodes and a couple of people that are younger than me back here, all right? More people in this church do not have smartphones right now than got them when they first came out 15 years ago. You are not an early adopter people. I'm not an early... 2012 was when I got my first iPhone. It was an iPhone 4. The 6 already existed. It was free, okay? The GMC is not formed yet, okay? And it's not going to be formed for over a year. And I think that needs to be pointed out. If you're not early adopter people, then you need to keep that in mind, okay? You're not pioneers, and that's okay. I'm not a pioneer either, all right? Or later, okay? Later for disaffiliation. The protocol might pass. It is still an option on the table for General Conference in 2024, which would make it financially more feasible to disaffiliate and to do more graciously. Nothing currently has changed in our position on human sexuality and cannot for at least 2 years. And that, if that is where you are right now and you're worried about it changing, well, it can't change for 2 years anyway, all right? So that is to be kept in mind. So quick, middle of the road, later, if you disaffiliate, that's all on the table right there, all right? Or not at all, obviously, is an option as well. We are United Methodist Church right now. We do well as United Methodist Church, and our mission and our vision are not impacted by issues outside our scope. And I do believe that, all right? Lots of murkiness out there, all right? Question that came forth, what about your pastors? What about myself? What about Tyler, right? How does this impact us? First United Methodist Church Lindale is not Michael Peschke Church. That's the beauty of the of Methodism, okay? It's not just United Methodist, this is Methodism. The church is never meant to be about the pastor. That's why we vote half clergy, half laity. That's why we move pastors around. I cannot fathom a church that has the same pastor for 20 years. That sounds beautiful maybe to some people, but it's hell as far as I'm concerned. Because the church becomes the pastor. And the church is never meant to be the pastor, okay? So, my role, and Tyler's role, but my role is to be a rudder for you, and you are the current that is going to guide our ship in whatever direction we're going to go. But I'm the rudder to help steer you in the direction that you are going as a current, okay? We're using boat imagery here, right? Because I don't want to explain aerodynamics in planes right now, all right? I mean, my role is to help guide you in whatever direction you're going to go as a church, okay? My end goal, my opinions now, where I will be whenever it comes, does not matter, because that's not what this church is about. It's about you. I will help guide you in the direction that you are going by the current that you as a church lead this congregation as a whole, all right? So if this church ends up in a place this year or next year or in 2 years or whatever the case may be, that is different than where I'm going to go, I'll go there after you've gotten to where you are, okay? My destination and Tyler's destination is later down the road, depending on what happens, okay? I will, and I told you this 3 years ago, I will never let me determine you as a church, because that is not what I'm supposed to be as your pastor, okay? So if you want to know what my opinions are, tough. You're not going to get them, all right? And that's the truth, because it's not who you are. You are First United Methodist Church Lindale. I will help guide you wherever you go, all right? And Tyler and I may go in different directions in the end too. That's just where we are, but that's the reality of this, okay? On my end, my health insurance and my pension are in the Texas Annual Conference right now, okay? I spent 9 years going from calling to ordination. I've been a clergy person in this conference for 13 years, okay? I've got a lot wrapped up in United Methodist Church. My wife, who's sitting right here, she has a pre-existing health condition. Health insurance is a big deal for us, right? I know y'all understand this. So those things influence me in ways they're not going to influence you. I know it's hot. The air's running. I'm sorry. It's hot outside, okay? Anyway. But that does come to play, but that's going to be coming to play when it's time for it to come into play for myself and for Tyler, wherever that may go, okay? In the meantime, we will jointly keep steering this church in the direction you are called to go. All right. I am getting closer to questions, I promise you. Finally, quoting John Wesley, though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike. May we not be of one heart, though we are not of one opinion. Without all doubt, we may. Herein, all the children of God may unite, notwithstanding these smaller differences. The very heart of our people as Methodists, we've been about trying to bring together people of different opinions and thoughts to one. We're in a tough place to make that happen right now, okay? But in the end, we're still meant to be together, all right? Let's see here. I'm going to skip over this next part. Okay. Before we get to the questions, here are my parting words for my presentation. By the way, you're never supposed to end a sermon like this, but this is not a sermon, so. I will guide this church in the direction the church is called to go. I am steering the ship in the current that you are providing. I will do this faithfully because this church is about you and not about me. I will be held accountable for this promise. What happens to me afterward is between me and God and my family. And I mean the accountable part. If I get to a point in this process where it is becoming about me, you need to call me out, okay? And I'm dead serious about that. It's not going to get there because that's not who I am. But if it did, I want you to call me out. In return, I expect excellence from you as a current we are navigating. If you are the current, I expect you to be the best current that you possibly can be so that this church can get to wherever it needs to be, all right? So, if your desire is that we remain as United Methodists, then I expect you to uphold your vows of prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness faithfully, which means you are to be present in church, you are to pray for this church, you are to give to this church, you are to serve this church, and you are to be a witness to this community, okay? If you believe that you would go to the Global Methodist Church instead and our church should go that direction, I expect you to live into the expectations that the Global Methodist Church will have of you. They are going to tell you and make you be prayerful and present and give to the church and be a part of small groups. In fact, you have to be a part of a small group to be a part of the Global Methodist Church, okay? If that's where you want to go, then you need to do that now. All right? If you want to be a part of that current that is steering this church, this is how you become a part of that current. If you are not being faithful to this, then how can you expect to have influence over this process, okay? So, you notice how both directions are essentially the same. You're going to pray for this church. You're going to be present in this church. You're going to give to this church. You're going to serve this church. If you're in a small group, you're going to be a part of a small group. If you're not in a small group, you need to be a part of a small group. And you're going to be a positive witness for Jesus Christ in our community. Positive witness for Jesus Christ in this community, all right? I point you to the Gospels if you want to know what that looks like, okay? Your faithfulness shows your commitment to this process and this church, and your influence in the current will be much stronger. If you expect accountability of others, then you must be willing to be held accountable yourself first. So, okay, I'm going to preach to you here, okay? To those on the progressive side, I ask you to acknowledge that many who stand alongside you have broken the covenant of our denomination. Many have intentionally violated our discipline, and this has damaged our connectional relationship. Many on the other side are hurt by these violations and are hurt that they are now the ones who feel like they must leave rather than the ones who have broken the covenant. I've heard more about this than anything, all right?
that people feel like rules have not been followed, that people have not been held accountable. And that hurts people, all right? To those on the conservative side, I ask you to acknowledge that those who feel that our stance on human sexuality has hurt people and that they too approach this matter from a strong scriptural stance. Progressives know the Bible just as well as you do conservatives, okay? To view grace over legalism is in line with our understanding of Jesus Christ, all right? Nobody is fully right here. We are all guilty at times of being less than Christ-like, and we all need grace. So I point you to Ephesians 4:32, which I pointed you to now for 3 years in times like these. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ has forgiven you. Please dwell on this. Be kind, tender-hearted, and forgiving, because you have been forgiven. Amen. Ha! I did not need applause. You're making me feel weird. Okay, so, questions. Before you ask questions, all right, I'm going to answer some questions that were sent to me over the last few weeks, all right? I'll answer your question in a second, honey, let's see, okay? So thank you. All right. Judy, I'm looking at you, A, because you're the first person to send me questions, and B, because you just sent me some different ones. I haven't had a chance to look at them, okay? But, okay, I have. Okay, good. And I probably have answered these, but I'm going to go ahead and do them anyway, okay? I may have blended a few of y'all's questions together or brought them forth in a presentation, so I'm going to try to be faithful to what was sent to me as best I can here, okay? So, Judy asked about the conference being able to disaffiliate. We know that that's no longer a thing, okay? I told you who our delegates are, by the way. She asked about that. She asked a question I think is important. She said, are our delegates to vote the desire of our congregation? So you heard who our delegates are, and certainly they are supposed to know what the desire of the congregation is, and know the heart of the church. But they're also to respond to how God is moving them as well, okay? So there's not like a system in place to make sure that Gabe, who's one of your lay delegates, does exactly what Joe wants him to do. I'm sorry, Joe, but you're just right here, so okay? But they are supposed to know your church. That's why Gabe's on the leadership team. He's on our development team. He's on other teams as well. And he's usually in worship when he's not in Tahiti or wherever he is right now. But that's kind of how our system works, okay? Our delegates are to know what's going on in their church, but they also are to vote on their own conscience and how God leads them, okay? I think that's a good question to ask, though. And when, the when question, Judy, yeah, there's not an answer for that, right? But the when is, I'll talk about that more in a minute, though. Let's see here. Talked about property, talked about payments. I'm doing pretty good, all right. Financial capability, that's a good question, okay? So Judy asked, are we financially capable of paying the portion amount and the unfunded pension liability amount that I mentioned earlier? So apportionment-wise, we pay our apportionments every month, okay? And that's a big deal about me. I won't serve a church that doesn't pay their apportionments. I will tell the bishop to move me, okay? That's my vow, all right? I believe in my vows, and one of my vows is to lead a church to pay apportionment. So we're paid up for 2021, and we're current. There you go. That's the word you're looking for, yes. I was going to use numbers, but more importantly, we're current. We budget that into our budget every month, and so we're current to our apportionments. The unfunded pension liability, like I said, is not a clear number right now. It could be anywhere from $200,000 to $350,000 with some wiggle room in any direction there, right? I don't have that cash sitting on hand right now. We don't. I do, but we don't, because you have to pay people still. We don't. Let's put it that way. We do not have that much on hand. So the leadership team over the next however long is going to be talking about, do we need to create a way of setting aside some extra money to do this. And if we don't disaffiliate, then we have money sitting aside for something else, right? We can figure that out. But we're going to talk about that. There's also talk about, although it says in there you have to pay it right up front, that actually may not be the case, that they may wind up spreading it out, okay? But that's also hearsay and rumor and options and possibilities. So that's the best I can answer that question there, okay? All right. And timing, we talked about that, okay. Jane Lemaster asked a question about the accountability thing, because I talked about in my letter how one of the main differences about the GMC is accountability is a big part of the Global Methodist Church. It's not the only difference, but it is a difference. I talked about how an annual conference can't tell another annual conference what to do. And so if I, as a clergy person, violated my vows, but my bishop doesn't hold me accountable, then I'm not being held accountable. And there are some bishops that aren't holding their clergy accountable. If a bishop is breaking their vows, but their jurisdiction doesn't hold them accountable, then once again, there's no one to hold them accountable, okay? Now, there's a million ways that you could be breaking the vows, by the way, okay? But, we're talking about one specific, but there's a million ways that you could be breaking your vows. But in the end, it's local church, it's conference/bishop/jurisdiction. And I mean, the Western jurisdiction right now is very much not following a lot of the process, and that's just one place, okay? Our conference, as it is right now, is stickler to the Book of Discipline, to the best I know, and so we're in a different place, but we can't tell Arizona what to do, or whatever the case may be, okay? So that's just, knowledge on that end. So in the Global Methodist Church, they intend, and once again, they are not fully developed, but they intend to be much more held together by accountability. And they have all sorts of plans for teams and councils and that kind of stuff to handle these things. But in the end, their plan is that if you're a lay person and you're not giving to your church, you're going to be removed from the rolls. If you're a clergy person and you rebaptize, thank you. I was going to make something funny, but there you go. Rebaptize somebody, you'll be removed as a pastor in the Global Methodist Church. If you're a bishop and you rebaptize someone, let's just use that one again, you'll be removed as a bishop. So and it will be very clear as far as they plan on that. Now, I'm sure it's not going to be that easy, but they plan on being much more, to hold the accountability much stronger across their denomination. So, yeah, okay. Oh, I had a whole list of general GMC differences here that I think I covered. I forgot that I put it in here. It's 12 pages long, by the way, just to let you know. So there you go. Yeah, I'll just leave that for now. Okay. Let's see here. Ron had a bunch of questions. I think I mostly covered yours, Ron. Okay. We talked about majority votes. I'm sorry, I'm just reading through my notes here. What's that? Okay. So he asked about some churches have already begun the disaffiliation process. I told you that 3 have already disaffiliated. We're going to vote on 3 here at annual conference, and there's already some that are in the process as well. So because it already exists to be a process, it has for 2 years now, there are churches that are already in this process. Different churches are in different places on this matter. Okay. Did anybody email me a question that I have not answered yet? That's where I'm going to start. Of course you can. Yes, ma'am.
Being one of the oldest people in here, so that gives me some question.
Sure.
It has to do with Judy's question.
Okay.
If we have people that are going to conference,
Yes, ma'am.
and let's say 3/5 of us said this is what we voted to say, but that doesn't suit their conscience, they can vote what they want to.
So just know
Wait a
that.
minute.
Well,
That's like the Congress of the United States, and I like
Well-
to know that we do a little bit better job
Well,
than the Congress.
Okay. So just know that when so let's say this annual conference that we're coming up to. Once again, we're not voting as a conference to disaffiliate because that's not a thing anymore, right? So if that was a thing, this would be a more weightier question right now, I think, all right? We vote on things like budgets and that kind of stuff. There were some resolutions that were going to be voted on that no longer are valid because of this, at least one for sure, and probably a second one. So what's left over to vote on is tame stuff that you probably wouldn't, quite frankly, care about in the first place, for the most part. But let's say 2021 annual conference, there's something that's happened that's big. We would have gatherings like these, and your delegates would hear your voice, and to the best of their ability, they would vote as they're called by the church. Yes, I get that this is very Congress-like, and maybe that's not the best direction to look at things, but that's the way our system is. Now, anyway, that's kind of where we are. I don't think I answered that fully, but that's the best I could answer that. Is that?
There's no point in us voting if they're gonna vote like they want to.
But remember, in the end, it's local. If you're talking about disaffiliation, that's local church, and y'all vote on that part. It's not your delegates, that's y'all. Okay? So that's a different thing. So you did send me questions, so I'm going to tell Judy. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
All that said,
Yes, ma'am.
this is the first, and I stand corrected, but this is the first gathering of our congregation in several years.
Okay.
Will we get back to where we do this regularly enough that we know where we stand? We know
Yes.
what we believe, our leadership knows.
Yeah.
We trust our leadership, but they need to hear from us how we want them to lead.
Absolutely. That's exactly how I envision this, Judy. So the question is, will you as a church be able to have meetings like this to tell the leadership team how you feel the process should move forward, if it should move forward, right? And the answer to that is yes, that is my intention, okay? I intend for our leadership team and myself to create a process where we're having ways for you as a church to you're going to have to keep hearing about this stuff, right? And the problem is that between now and Wednesday, this much of our church is going to hear this information, right? And so we're going to have more, I'm going to have to say these things again 5 or 6 more times in reality to our church to get the church to a place where it's, at least people know what we're talking about. So yes, absolutely. I mean, we have had some meetings, but you're right. As far as something like this, it's been a while like this because we don't counsel the way we once did, right? It's usually for other types of things. So yes, I don't know what that looks like yet, but that is my absolute intent. You absolutely can, and you can because I don't expect our leadership team to guide this without the congregation's input. Let's say that word, okay? Yes, absolutely. I don't have timing on that or what it looks like. I'm on sabbatical in 3 weeks. I haven't said my sabbatical part yet, but I'm going to end with that. But that doesn't play. But yes, that is my intent. That's how I envision things. Okay? Yeah. So I'm going to 1 second, Marcia, because if you didn't email me yet, I'm going to give you boundaries. Okay? Okay. Boundaries. So I allowed this because they emailed me and I wanted to make sure that they had finished off what they'd asked, okay? Boundaries. I do not want a dogfight in my sanctuary, okay? And so here are my boundaries for questions, okay? You're all perfect Christians. I know you would never, ever, ever, okay, yeah, Every person is a child of God. We are defined by our relationship with God first, okay? So every person you're thinking about or talking about is a child of God. Listen before speaking. In fact, as much as possible, just listen. Strive to understand from the other person's viewpoint. So what I'm saying there is don't ask a question like, so-and-so says this or so-and-so believes this, okay? You can only speak for yourself, all right? Strive to reflect accurately the other person's viewpoint if you are going to say something. All right? Speak about issues and do not defame people. Do not speak about others, but about yourself only. Honor the Lord with your words and actions, remembering the mercy, grace, and forgiveness the Lord has given you. Disagree without being disagreeable. Keep it on topic, keep it on topic, keep it on topic. This is not your time to preach or show us your knowledge of Scripture, okay? My hope is none of you would have ever even thought about doing anything that's in my head that I had to create those rules for, okay? But if I hear a question that I feel is out of bounds, I am not going to answer it, all right? I believe in that very strongly. That's not what this is about. I was not going to even allow questions, I'll be completely honest with you. I was influenced to do otherwise. But I do not want anything being spoken that is not edifying, okay? So, and don't ask a question with a ulterior motive behind it. That's my big thing. Pastors are notorious for that nonsense, all right? I'm going to hear at an annual conference in 2 weeks. Somebody comes to the microphone, they want to be for or against or something, but they ask a question, which is just a stupid veiled attempt to say their point. Okay, no. Ask legitimate questions, okay? So, those are my boundaries. I'm going to pray first, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions. I'm going to come to you. You're going to speak the question. I will repeat it the best I can, then answer it the best I can. All right? Sound good? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of the time that we've had together thus far. We thank you for this church, for this wonderful congregation that we are a part of. And although our future is less than clear, that's the reality of who we are as Christians. We've always lived in a tension of where we are and where we're going. So we pray, oh God, that you might guide us in our thoughts and conversations, give us the right words and right actions, that we may, by your grace, be more Christ-like and exemplify that Christ-likeness in the world. We pray this in Christ's holy name. Amen. Okay. Wait a second. Yes, you have the first question. Yes. 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 Yeah. Point of clarification. Yes, ma'am. Yes, GMC. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. To an extent, yes.
Is it a possibility or a non-possibility that as they catch up on their stuff, the United Methodist Church will allow them to still be part of them, i.e. pensions?
Okay. So the question basically is the Global Methodist Church, the GMC, is being hashed out right now, and they are to an extent mimicking elements of being United Methodist, which is just being Methodist and then Wesleyan, right? So the question is, at some point as they form, could they become part of the UMC? So, and you mentioned pension specifically, so let me bring that up. So our pension plan in the United Methodist Church is run by an organization called WestPath, Wesley Pathway is what it is, okay? Because everything in our denomination is about John Wesley. They are to an extent an independent entity now, okay? So they formed this way several years ago, seeing that this is what was going to happen. So the Global Methodist Church will, unless things change, be a part of the WestPath system also. The pension plans will be different because the current one is specific to the UMC. Whatever they create will nonetheless likely still be run by WestPath. So there's going to be that connection there. They will not be like a co-denomination at all. They would have hoped that protocol would have passed, and they would have got $25 million and it would have been easier for everybody. That's what they were hoping to get to. It didn't happen, so that's where they are right now. A bigger question will be, will they become part of the Global Methodist Council? I think, no, that's not right. Anyway, the Methodist Council that exists for all denominations, and I would guarantee they're going to eventually, don't hold me accountable to that one, but I'm pretty sure they would be. That means there would be some connections that way, but in the end, they're going to be a different denomination, separate denomination, but we'll have those connections. I mean, there are even questions about could a United Methodist pastor serve a Global Methodist Church and back and forth, because we have some agreements like that with other Methodist groups and even the Evangelical Lutheran Church right now. If it ever happened to be years down the road, it's not anytime soon, but that's also questions out there. So that's the best I can say about the connections between those two right now. Yeah. All right. Question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, this is all new to you, and you're not the only one in here, by the way. I just forwarded a lot of information, right? Yeah.
I'm a Catholic.
Yeah.
At the Methodist Church.
Yeah, of course.
That's how I feel I am.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Can homosexuals attend service?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Can they receive communion?
Yes. Yes.
Can they be married as civil servants?
and come and,
Be a married couple in the church? Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
so what is the problem? I don't understand.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can fully speak to this, but I'll do my best, okay? So, yes, a self-avowed practicing homosexual can worship with us, have communion with us, be baptized. I will say serve in leadership. Some of my clergy brethren would disagree with that, but that's not in the book of this one. It does not say that at all in there. Amongst other things. I mean, and I know other churches where they have gone off and gotten married somewhere else, and they're now part of the church as a couple, right? With couples. So the surface issue for us is the clergy part, right? Where there are some people who feel a call into ministry or vocational pastoral ministry, and they feel they're being called within the United Methodist Church for that, but they're also self-avowed practicing homosexuals, and so they can't live into their calling. That's how they feel, okay? And then there's people that would want to be married, have the wedding within the context of their congregation because, there's something special and powerful about being married in the context of your congregation. So that's the surface level, and I mean it's surface. I mean, it's important, but it's one of many layers to all of this. So some would argue that that our prohibition against clergy and the self-avowed practicing homosexual thing should not exist, and some would argue that we should be allowed to have same-sex unions in our churches because that's the law of the land and so forth. So that's one side, and then others would say the exact opposite, right? So there's that element to it. And this is where not being a long-term Methodist probably plays in the most here. So many feel that in 2024 or 2028, those current rules about LGBTQ persons will not be part of the UMC anymore. That'll be voted out by a general conference. And so that's where some people are looking towards the future and feeling that that's where the United Methodist Church is going. So that's probably more about it than anything, along with the connectional part, the accountability part, and knowing that the current rules are not being upheld in different places, okay? So that's the best I can answer that without, anyway, that's the best I can say about that, yeah. Okay? Yes, sir.
So with the disaffiliation of the church,
Yes.
how would that affect our church locally as we stand today as opposed to where it might be next year?
Okay. Well, and timing is a big part of this. So he's asking if, as far as disaffiliation goes and how it affects our, and Terry, are you talking about like us specifically disaffiliating or other churches disaffiliating as a whole or just the whole? Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Well, so, I mean, I don't want to be a crystal ball and tell you what's going to happen to our church. What I intend for us to do is for our leadership team to, we've been talking about this leadership team for a long time, okay? But it's never been it has not gotten to a point where it needed to be beyond that until now. But the leadership team and I will be talking over, however many months about how we want to help this church to discern. That's the key word, is discernment. Are we going to discern that we need to disaffiliate? If we are going to discern that, what direction are we going to go? And are we going to discern not to disaffiliate and remain United Methodist? And so it's going to begin there with them. At some point, we're going to start talking to you as a church about, getting input from the congregation. I have no idea what that looks like because I just gave you boundaries. I want boundaries to be a part of that. I don't want, mud fights going on. But we're going to get influence from the church. And at some point, the leadership team will come to a decision on either we've heard enough and yes, we need to begin the disaffiliation process to see if that's where we're going to go in the end with voting, or we're going to say, no, we're not there yet, or we never will be there yet, okay? If we decide to move down the disaffiliation process, whenever that may be, you got to decide what you're going to disaffiliate to be, which paragraph you're using, which is the district superintendent helps that process, by the way. They help guide that part. And then eventually you get to having a church conference or a charge conference. There's a voting thresholds that I talked about earlier that have to be met. And and then you have to pay money, all this stuff, payments to stuff. The conference has to vote on you. It's all those things that go into play in disaffiliation. I will say is that, so this is the personal part, is that if this church did go down the road of disaffiliation, and let's say 95% of the church said that we want to disaffiliate, what about the other 5%? What happens to them? Or the flip side, let's say we're going to vote to disaffiliate, and let's say it's a 67% threshold for the 2553, and we get to 65%. What's left of the church then also? Or we get to 68%, what happens to the 32% of the church also? And there's that's where the unknowns are in this. And I've talked to several people in a congregation who might lean in one direction, but can see themselves in another direction, or vice versa. And that's where a lot of this clarity and talk needs to be. I think for those who think we should have a new name on the church outside right today, I hope you're hearing this today tells you why that's not the case. There's just way too much unknown here right now. So that's best I can say about what would happen in this church. I don't know. There may be more to that, but that's where I would say right now for that. So.
One thing you said, like a third of the church wants to stay as is, not disaffiliate.
Yeah.
Go to another church.
Yeah. So,
How is this
well,
church going to finance?
absolutely. I mean, that's part of it. That's what the leadership team is going to talk about. How financiers are part of this. Obviously, worship. I mean, it's all part of it. How we support all these ministries. It's all absolutely is all a part of this, and that's going to have to be worked out and talked through in the end. And that needs to be held up. Somebody I was talking to yesterday said they hate that money is a part of this. Well, I mean, it's our life, right? I mean, that's just the way we exist. I mean, I can't make, the food pantry can't happen. Yes, it's a separate organization, but it can't happen without the 6 figures that they spend every year, right? Or you name it, right? So absolutely, those, no matter what, it's going to affect us, okay? No matter what happens, whether it's this year or next year or 2024 or 2028, it's going to affect this congregation. The question is, how is it going to affect us? When's it going to affect us? What's the magnitude of that? For me, I really hope that we would have had General Conference this year. And I really hope that we would have passed the protocol as it was brought forward. And I would have hoped that churches and conferences would have been able to move wherever they were going to move in a very gracious and non-penalty-minded fashion. And the reason why I hope for that is because I could envision a day where in Lindale, Texas, there could be a Lindale Global Methodist Church and a Lindale United Methodist Church. I could. All right? What they would look like, I don't know. I've got news for you. You're not all of one mind on this matter, okay? If you hadn't figured that out yet, we can't agree on worship styles in this church. Are you kidding me? So it could happen. I mean, for what it's worth, if you were existing in Patterson, Texas, where I grew up, 100 years ago, on one corner was Patterson Methodist Episcopal Church South, and another was Patterson Methodist Episcopal Church North, which was a German church, okay? I'm heirs of both of those churches, by the way. I've got family from both of those directions. So it's not like it's a new concept for us. I mean, go to Georgetown, Texas, there's 2 UMCs across the street from each other right now. Sheesh. But yes, so I'm pontificating here, but the point being is that it's going to affect us. All this is going to affect us. When it's going to affect us, how it's going to affect us, that's why I am advocating for time and prayer and discernment and recognizing that we're not all iPhone 1 people, okay, and that we need to kind of move with this in a very methodical way. Heaven forbid Methodists do things methodically, right? So, okay. That's where I am, okay? But once again, I'm not your current, and so if the current tells me to do something else, I'm going to go with the current in the end, all right? Okay. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Mine is more about I don't understand.
Yeah?
If this is such an important thing and such a risk in the church, why are we not having general conference about it?
Why what?
Why are we not having general conference?
Okay, so,
Why are they not
yeah.
making sure that happens virtually somehow?
Yeah, so I want you to envision General Conference. She asked why we're not having General Conference right now, which it should be happening this month. It would have been happening this month. So United Methodist Church, as I mentioned, is 12 million people across much of the world. our delegates come from every conference, right? We're balanced. We have clergy and lay delegates from every conference. The issue being brought forward when they decided to not hold general conference this year was about visas, meaning you're in Kenya, and there's vaccination requirements in this place, and there's visa requirements in this place, and they did not think they could adequately get all representation from all across the world to one place at one time. You ask, well, we can do things virtually, why not do virtually, right? Well, there are delegates in Africa where Wi-Fi doesn't exist, right? Or Zoom doesn't exist. Places in East Texas where these things don't exist. I mean, come on. So, I mean, literally, there are delegates in our own nation that probably would have trouble with that. I have trouble with that some days, right? So that's why they did not hold it for those stated reasons. Some would argue that there's more to it than that, but that's the best way to look at it, okay? But yes, that's why we're really here today. You know, if we were going to have general conference, and we would be waiting to see what happened more as a church, but we're not there, and so the boil is now boiling over to an extent. But that's a good question. I mean, that's very fair to ask. Yeah. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
You stated that you were going to stick with this church
Mm-hmm.
as a guide
Uh-huh.
until the decision is made.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is going to happen if you happen to get reassigned?
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. No, so, yeah, that is a fair question. So our conference as it currently exists has been trying the best not to move clergy around as much as possible. Now, clergy retire every year, or the circumstances happen. There's been more moves this year than they had thought they were going to have, but that's just the way it is. They have been trying, and this is not opinion, I've heard this from the highest levels, they've been trying to over the last couple of years, match clergy to churches. They always do that, but maybe even more so to kind of help this situation. So, let's put it this way. If this church, I mean, we're talking about the whole process now, but let's say we really were at some point in the disaffiliation process come next March, which is when a lot of this talk happens, they wouldn't move me, okay? That's just, I can almost hold myself accountable to that one. I would be willing to bet that. Unless I was just flailing about and you couldn't stand me anymore, or whatever the case may be. But they're going to do their best to not do moves like that if a church is in a position where they're anywhere along the way. That's the best I can answer that. If you want to know me personally, we don't want to move right now. We're quite happy where we are. I have a daughter who's a freshman right now. We would love to be around for a while longer so she can finish out her high school at least. And so that's where we are, and our bishop and the cabinet does listen to that. So that does play a part, but you can't guarantee anything either, right? Yes, it's being recorded. It's been heard. So yeah, it's up there. So yeah. So I hope that kind of answered the question there. That's the best I could say. Yeah. It's also why I'm going on a sabbatical in 3 weeks, right? And why I would prefer if our church was not trying to navigate this process during those 3 months, okay? It means that y'all aren't going to be talking because I know you better, right? You're going to go out in the parking lot and talk. I know y'all. So and this is being recorded also, and I want the church to hear this. I will say this come Sunday. I am calling our congregation to enter into a 12-week prayer period, okay? Starting on June 6th when I leave, okay? You can pray when I'm not here, by the way, just to let you know, okay? But a 12-week prayer period where, I hope you're not having meetings like this for some reason, but praying about where God is calling our congregation during that time, okay? Our interim does not need to be trying to navigate this for y'all, right? A, he doesn't know you. B, he doesn't want to deal with this. And C, he doesn't want to deal with this. So, and Tyler is taking on a ton of more work that I do. He doesn't need to be dealing with this also. So I'm calling you as a congregation, starting on June 6th, once again, when I go on sabbatical for 12 weeks to be in a period of prayer, okay? When I come back, I know I'm going to be dealing with this, right? I'll be dealing with this and budgeting, because I budget in August usually, nominations, because I usually do that in August, stewardship campaign, because I'm usually working that out in August. So I've got a lot on my plate when I get here. That's why I'm going sabbatical, right? I'm pulling away so that I can be better prepared to lead you as a congregation in all these things. I told y'all when I announced my sabbatical that this has been a year and a half in the works. Literally a year and a half ago, God called me into sabbatical. And I fought it back then. I promise you I was there because our previous district superintendent knows that I was talking about this. It's written down, by the way, if you don't believe me, okay? It's been talked about for a long time. But more fully, back in December is when I really began the process. January is when I talked to the leadership team. I didn't know that General Conference wasn't going to happen by the way back then. So that was already going before we knew we'd be where we are as a denomination right now. But I can see God pausing me so that I'm better able to navigate with you in the future. Does that make sense? I hope. Okay. So I hope you all prayerfully consider that and prayerfully guide this church while I'm away. And that's my hope for us. When I meet with the leadership team here in 2 weeks or a week and a half, whatever it is, that's where I'm going to talk to them about, and I hope that that's how they lead us as well. Okay? Okay. Questions? Yes. Yes, sir.
Could I ask
Yeah.
a very simple-minded question?
Wh-
Physicist, and I see the world
Uh-huh.
as very mechanical.
Yeah, sure. Huh?
It appears to me, and you may have a much more accurate perception, that the tail is wagging the dog
Okay. Uh-huh.
instead of the dog
Uh-huh.
wagging the tail.
Okay.
And my perception is
Mhm.
there are those who have a certain opinion about human sexuality, and they're going to take over the church, and we're going to have to disaffiliate. Is that correct?
Well, I want to keep us within our boundaries here, right? We don't speak for other people, so I want to be clear about that. I kind of mentioned this earlier. I mean, when I address the more progressive-minded people in our church, is that this is what I literally, I don't hear people worrying about gay marriages. I don't hear people talking about a gay clergy person in your pulpit. What I hear people talking about is that the broken covenant aspect of it and how that is affecting others, that some in the denomination are breaking the covenant, and that rather than that group being forced to follow the line, it's the other side of the coin who feels like they have to do something different. I want to make clear that nobody's making anybody leave, right? I mean, nobody's holding a gun to anybody's head saying you have to do anything. It's more of I see this happening, and therefore I feel like I need to do this instead. So that you have to be mindful about that as well. It's interesting because 2553, the paragraph that I just talked about, which was created in 2019, was really created for more progressive-minded people to be able to exit a denomination. Because in 2019, we more firmly acknowledge our current stance on this matter, okay? It's just that what's happened instead is that there have been more bishops who have been disobedient, more churches disobedient, more clergy disobedient, and there's less of that connectionalism there, and that's why now those on the other side of the coin feel they are right where they are. It doesn't answer the question. I think that's just where we are right now. But once again, I mean, nobody's being told they have to do anything, but people get to a point on their scales where they're tipped too far, right? And I think right now we Methodists who are meant to be in balance are way out of balance, and we're going like this. We're the whole scale out of balance thing. And you know what scales out of balance do? Eventually something's going to happen that's going to throw it either completely off or it's going to. Anyway, the point being is that's kind of where we are. So once again, I don't want to speak for other people, but I have heard this sentiment expressed a lot, and I do hear that. I mean, I don't know a good analogy for it. I'd use the Astros, but maybe that's not the best analogy for rule breaking, because they were held accountable actually on their end. So Anyway, the best thing I can say is you're not alone in feeling the feel. I mean, literally, I've heard that more than anything else. All right, you and several other people in this church, and those are the ones that said something to me. Okay, that's where people feel the most hurt. Now, and I'm not going to talk another direction. That's where I'll leave that. Okay, so all right, okay, questions? Yes, Joe.
Yeah, I sort of mentioned this to you this morning.
Yes.
And you showed me off this one earlier, and then hold that around a little bit. If a pastor is associated with a church that is affiliated, and he feels called to go back into the UMC, how is that
Yeah.
period of time that to a certain disaffiliated church
Yeah.
work into his future?
Yeah. Which, once again, this isn't necessarily just talking about me, right? This is just a hypothetical question. So he's asking, let's say there's a church in, let's make up a name. Anyway, yeah, there's a First UMC of First Texas, okay? Hope there's not a First Texas, but anyway, First UMC of First Texas. And they decided to disaffiliate. They do the whole process and they disaffiliate. But their pastor doesn't want to go to the GMC. They want to remain UMC. So it would be our understanding, once again, this is not fleshed out, but it would be understanding that they would be allowed to continue to serve that as help transition to the point where the GMC can put a new pastor in that place. As a UMC pastor, my especially specifically an elder, I need to maybe back up on that. An elder or a deacon, ordained clergy, our affiliation is with the conference, annual conference. I didn't want to just say Texas, but the annual conference. And so I don't belong to First United Methodist Church Lindale. I belong to the Texas Annual Conference, right? And so I can't leave the conference, even if my church did, without me saying so that I wanted to disaffiliate and go to somewhere else, right? So that person wouldn't lose their affiliation just because of churches. They would have to make their own decision in that direction. But the hope would be, and it's got to be fleshed out, that there would be some gracious way to allow a transition to happen in a healthy way, right? And then that pastor, if they wanted to remain UMC, would just get appointed somewhere else eventually, right? It's all very uncertain right now because it's all new and all that kind of stuff, but that's a good question, yeah. My wife texted me a question, so I'm going to answer it just because she asked it. So I mentioned earlier that some had thought that the annual conferences could vote to disaffiliate, and that's been proven or said otherwise by the Judicial Council. But if we're the legal entity, she's saying, so why couldn't you do it anyway, right? Because in the end, they're the legal entity. And the answer to that is connection still. We still try to follow the Book of Discipline and how the Judicial Council rules, even if some may disagree with that, even if we are the legal entity. And that's really the only answer to that. Really what the Judicial Council said is not that a conference cannot eventually vote to disaffiliate, it's just that the mechanics are not currently in place to do so, which is very legalese and kind of slippery and all that kind of stuff also, but that's, how it works sometimes. So that's my best answer to that. Yes, ma'am.
So
Yeah.
would the bottom line be if they chose to disaffiliate
Uh-huh, uh-huh,
and not get approved,
uh-huh.
also at least affiliate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's, you're obviously living in a theory, right? But yeah. So I mean, if you wanted to know, I just told you that the Texas Annual Conference's unfunded pension liability is $65 million, right? We got a lot more money sitting around than that. Okay, so we've got a $20 million piece of property in the museum district of Houston, another $20 million of other assets out there. Tons of cash, but it's all for something, right? It's for health care, it's for pensions, it's for you name it. So that would be the whole thing, is what happens to all of that stuff. So if the protocol happened, you take it with you, right? If a conference disaffiliated, but because we're not there, we're not there. But that's absolutely right. I mean, never mind, I'm not going to say what I was about to say. I will not say that, so okay, yes. That's my best answer for that, yeah, okay. Yes, I know, we're getting really, really long here, so. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Meredith.
Okay, so what happens if a church votes to disaffiliate?
Uh-huh.
Starts the process,
Uh-huh.
and then the annual conference people, whatever, say that, like, the general
Yeah. So it's a timing question about if a church disaffiliates, if General Conference happens and they change the rules, maybe in a positive way or a negative way, how that impacts you. It depends on where you are in the process. So Grace Fellowship is a church that disaffiliated in Katy, okay? I guess it was last year or 2 years ago. Pretty large congregation that's in line with the Free Methodist Church now. Let's say in 2 years that General Conference meets and they pass the protocol, right? They don't get their money back. They've already paid it. They're not going to get that, But let's say there's a church that's really in the process right there. They haven't finished it. Depends if they haven't gotten to the point of the annual conference voting on them. That's the last step. They're not done yet. You've got to get to that point. So you could vote as a church and you can pay your money, but the conference hasn't voted to finish it off. You're not finished yet. So depends on where you are in that part. I think it would be a unusual situation that would have to be weighed out by somebody better than me if a church had voted, had to pay their money, and the conference hasn't had a chance to meet yet, and suddenly things change, you get your money back or something like that. And I don't have the answer to that question. So, yeah. Good question, though. It's all about processes and what timing is happening and all that kind of stuff. Once again, it's all murky, and that's why I'm calling us to navigate this in the way we are, right? So. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, absolutely, Judy. It's okay.
So the protocol,
Yeah.
it's still out there.
Yeah.
And what about general conference?
2024.
If it's set in 2024, if they set it with protocol is still in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So as of this moment, it's still a proposed resolution or whatever the proper term is for it right now. So, but will it get to General Conference in 2 years? I don't know. When it gets there in 2 years, will it look like it does now? I don't know. But it's still an option that's out there for sure. So yes, on that end. I do hope for that future because I do see grace and hope. And I really did believe that was an option that would allow for multiplication to happen. I really saw hope in the protocol. It's not as strong as it was 2 years ago. If we had had General Conference in 2020, I'm fairly convinced we would have had a protocol and we would be in a different place right now, but we didn't. So, yeah. But yes, it's still, that's why I brought it up, honestly, is because it's all these little pieces that have to be weighed by a congregation to help them discern how they're going to move forward. That's why I'll be honest with you. I don't understand churches that are already way down the road because you're the iPhone 1 people as far as I'm concerned, and I don't. That's not where I exist. But it's not about me. One more time, I'll say that. So there you go. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. Well, so God is in control, absolutely. I believe that God obviously acts through us, right? I mean, that's part of the life of a Christian. That's why we have the stories that we have in the Bible and so forth. And so, I don't necessarily fully endorse a sit back and watch, right, life, but you continue to pray and you listen for God's will and discernment. Yes, you're trying to hear where the voice of God is calling you. And I have to lift up the possibility that two very similar churches, God may end up in different places, and that's just the way the movement is going, right? And that's okay if we allow it to be okay, right? So, absolutely. Okay. Hey, Tyler.
I just got a question about how would you encourage us in the church to approach people who are coming from the outside looking
Yeah.
into the United Methodist Church? What would
Yeah.
be the most tactful?
I'm not a master of tact, is my problem. Ask my wife. So, yeah, that is a fair question. He's asking, how do you approach people that from the outside looking in about this situation? Like I said, the Fox station in Tyler had a news story last week. It was an okay story. It was about useless, quite frankly. It didn't really tell you much, but it was an okay story. You're certainly going to see anything on the internet you want to find, and then some, and only 2% of it's anywhere accurate. You think I would have thought about this through already, wouldn't you, Tyler? But I honestly, that's the part of me that always believes in every situation is different, so that's why I sometimes don't like blanket. So I will tell you that there are people in this community who probably have thoughts and feelings about our church that are 100% wrong, all right? And it's about a million things. About our theology, about how we do communion and baptism, you name it, right? And this is one of those things, and they're hearing whatever they're hearing out there. My first, golly. Tell you what, let me write something. I don't want to say something that's being recorded that I'm going to regret in 2 hours, so... one of my, and I will write up something. I'll write something for y'all as a church, okay? Let's do that before I leave in 3 weeks. I think one of the biggest issues that we Christians have is gossip, okay? Somehow or another, we think that every other sin is the worst one, and we are perfectly fine with gossip and almost encourage it at times. Here's the reality is how many of you honestly could leave here and say everything that I just said? I can't even say what I just said, okay? So we're always approaching something from less than a full understanding of what we're dealing with. And so when we take that into the world, if we're not 100% sure of what we're saying, then it's gossip. That's what the biblical definition of gossip is you're saying something that you don't really know or doesn't about you. I'll be honest with you, what's going on over here has nothing to do with First Baptist Church or Grace or Rose Heights it doesn't. This is us here at First United Methodist Church, Lindale. Just like what's going on at First Baptist Church has nothing to do with me. And yes, they got stuff going on there too, right? So we Christians, I don't know how we've gotten to a point where we're okay with gossip, but we need to be better about that because I think that's one of the biggest detriments to us as Christians because we use it to defame each other and slander each other and skew points and spin things that are horrible, absolutely horrible about each other. And I'm guilty of this. I'm professing right now, I'm guilty of this myself. And I have to correct myself at times or be corrected by God about that. So I think I'll figure out how to say it, but I think that's something we always have to be wary of. And that's even for us here in this church is that if you don't know something, don't share it, right? That's gossip. It is, okay? And I'll point to 1,000 scriptures that talk about gossip. So if you have questions or you don't know, come talk to me. And if I don't know, I'll point you in the right direction or I'll help you on that. That's why I talk about the parking lot meetings, and I somewhat joke, I hate parking lot meetings. That's why I talk about them. Because that's where the nonsense happens that is not helpful for us as Christians, okay? And that's not just us, right? I've served plenty of churches, and it happens at Baptist churches too, or who you name it. But we joke about that, but it's really not helpful, especially right now, okay? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I've only been back in the country 48 months.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me just make sure that I understood what you said.
Okay.
Nothing can be changed in the Methodist
Yes.
Church
Yes.
this 2 years.
At the earliest. Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Only General Conference can change the book at this point.
So
Yeah.
nothing's going to happen
Yeah.
to change how we
Yeah.
view it as a Methodist
Yes.
denomination.
Our official stance. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
So we'll
Yeah.
cross that bridge.
Yes. And then I will say that, Tyler, Debbie's exactly right. In the end, if your concern really is where we are, if you wanted to read what I read in that first or second page about where our stance is, you're more than welcome to read it. I don't know if you want to tattoo that on your hand or whatever, but that's our position, okay? That's where we stand right now. Whether you agree with it or not, that's where we stand right now. It cannot change without a General Conference vote. Just to add to that, depending on what the General Conference votes on, sometimes annual conferences then have to vote on it, and they have to approve it as well, a majority of them, depending on what the situation is. So there's even levels to that beyond that. So a General Conference can pass something, and depending on what it is, if a majority of annual conferences don't pass it, then it doesn't exist either, okay? So that's also in play on that. But where we are right now is where we are, no matter where you are in the subject or on how you feel about it. So absolutely, good question about that. Okay. Nathan Diller! No, he raised his hand, Stormy. It's okay. Yeah.
The Global Methodist Church also has a provisional
Yes.
discipline that
Yeah.
has not been approved until they have a general conference
Yeah.
in the next 12 to 18 months.
That's right. Absolutely.
So they also do not have an approved system.
Absolutely. So you're right about that, Nathan, is they have a provisional or a planned discipline. They call it something else, but they have a plan for their own discipline, much more streamlined, but it's not approved. It won't be approved until they have their own general conference. And so for now, which I've got documents in my folder here that talk about what they plan on doing, but it's not official right now. It's not doctrine right now. Absolutely right. Because once again, they just barely exist. It's the iPhone 1. It's iPhone 1, and the bugs are not been worked out, and you try to call mom, but it's calling Aunt Sally in Rhode Island right now, okay? So, yeah. Yes, sir. So what's that?
The Zoom.
The Zoom? I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Yeah. No. What'd you say again? I'm sorry.
The Global Methodist Conference may indeed be the Zoom, not the iPhone.
Oh, the Zoom. Oh. There you go. That's true. I mean, you never know about that. So that's technology stuff there. Okay. All right. You're dropping like flies. You're dropping like flies. So sorry. Yes, ma'am. Let's see. Yeah.
our whole congregation.
Yes, ma'am.
That we really keep our leadership team in prayer because
Absolutely.
they've got a lot on their shoulders.
Absolutely.
They've got a lot of us in the congregation that are
Yeah.
bending their ears, so to speak. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's very important that we all pray for each other.
Yes.
And that we pray for our leadership.
I completely concur about that. So when you're in this spirit of prayer for 12 weeks, especially lift up your leadership team, you lift up your clergy. You can pray for me while I'm gone. That's great. Absolutely. Especially for when I get back. But yeah, I think that's always important is that we lift up our leadership and we support them because, in the end, it's going to be about y'all, but they have to help begin the process and help guide the process. So thank you so much for saying that. We do need to be in prayer for our leadership. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I think we should all thank God.
Oh, well, thank you. All right. I get to do it again, by the way, on Wednesday, so yay. What? Yeah, I get to do this again on Wednesday. I will hopefully watch this recording because I didn't write down your questions. I have no idea what you just asked me, so just shooting from the hip here, as they say. Hey, Les, yes?
This will be the last question.
Well, I got one behind you, but yes.
You said earlier that pastors that stayed in the church for 20 years turned into being kind of like
Yeah.
What about pastors that might stay in this church for 9 years? Would that be okay?
Are you, is there, I feel like there's more to that question than just that. I just threw that 20 year, so the truth part is I threw the 20 years number out there just as a number, but I do, yes, the flip side is that, as they say, a pastor needs to be in a church at least 7 years to even really to know their church. So, by the way, this is the longest I've ever been at a church, so 4 years here in a little over a month, so, yes, yeah.
As part of the leadership team and
Yeah.
this church like what you do.
Oh, thank you, Wes. I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. This is the way I'm called, right? This is how I'm called. I try to be as balanced as I possibly can as a clergy person. I believe in administrative leadership. That's the way I'm gifted. I'm not perfect by any matter, but I don't spin things. I don't have ulterior motives. If I preach something and you think, well, did he really mean this? No, he didn't, because I don't do that. That's just not who I am. And so I'm I don't want to say black and white, but I try to lay it all out there just as plainly as I can. But preaching or whatever the case may be, this kind of stuff. Acknowledging that what I say often is I could be wrong. I preach that often. I was going to actually, originally was the plan of my sermon today, but it went in a different direction. But it's that reminder that I could be wrong. So I try to approach my call as your clergy person in that matter. And I do mean the accountability part. I mean, I've erred at times even here at this church, and I appreciate when someone lovingly holds me accountable to issues. And so I do mean that, especially with this, is if you feel that I'm not doing right. So Jesus tells us to tell the person first, right? So come tell me first. If you want to call Jay Meisenheimer our chair, fine, but I'd prefer you call me first. It's easier on Jay if nothing else. I am a nice person, I promise you, okay? I will not bite your head off. Yes, I'm 6'2". I realize that. I'm bald-headed. Maybe I look mean. I don't know, but I'm not. So I would really appreciate you just come talk to me, and then we go from there. Whatever the situation may be. But that's the way I operate, and I intend to guide the congregation as I'm called to do it. So yeah, thank you, Meredith. It's okay.
So you said something about if our bishop changes,
Yeah.
he could be forced to retire.
Yeah.
And that could change the dynamic
Yeah.
of our area.
Yeah.
Something that if that happens,
Yeah. So,
it will have a little bit of buffer time.
yeah. So if there is a real reason why things may be sped up, it may be because of the bishop situation. And I hate playing into that fear mindset, but it's a reality mindset. Now, some people don't like the way our bishop is running things right now, and they may rejoice in that, and that's okay too. But as far as I'm concerned, I think the bishop and his cabinet and our leadership in our conference are doing their best to try to navigate this as the best they can. So yes, if they have a jurisdictional conference this year, he would have to retire, and we'd have to get a new bishop. There is question about whether or not he could request to be left on for another year or two. That's also judicial council stuff that really is in the weeds. We'll know about jurisdictional conferences, I think, by the time annual conference meets in 2 weeks. And so if something earth-shattering happens and they say, yes, we're having jurisdictional conferences, I will say something to the church, okay? I really don't want to do another one of these before I leave, but I may have to if it looks that way. I don't think that would call that, but I may have to. And the problem with that is, so yes, let's say Bishop Jones has to retire and we get someone new. You may get someone that's even better. I don't know, right? But there is that fear because it has to be acknowledged. We have some bishops that are not doing their job properly. It's just true. That's how I feel, and I think a lot of people feel that way. I mean, if you're going to have a vow, you follow the vow, and if you don't agree with it, you either follow it or you leave, and that's how I feel about the situation. And others disagree with that, and that's okay. But that's one of the reasons why there's this tension right now is because of that reality. So, long story short, if they do have jurisdictional conferences, if we're going to change bishops, that's going to accelerate the timeline for not a lot, some churches in our conference, and we'll have to see how the current flows for us as a church. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Yes, sir, Mr. Larry.
The override of the ACs is going to get it
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So just to let y'all know, okay, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But if you ever have a planned event in the afternoon in this space, in May or June or July or August, this is the best you get, okay? There is several thousand square feet of roof up there that's sucking in sun right now, and the air has been running constantly for hours, and this is the best we get, okay? So my suggestion is to you, don't be Pastor Michael and schedule an afternoon event on a Sunday afternoon. Yes, it is about to override. We can fix that, but I think we're nearing an end here. If you have any other questions, by all means, pastor@fumclindale.org or call the office 903-882-8506. I will be doing this again on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. This part, 12 pages, will be the exact same, okay? I don't know how the questions will go. I'll do my best to listen and see if I can add them to my docket. But it's going to be the same. I don't know why you would come back unless you just want torture for another 2.5 hours. I'm glad we had this turnout. I hope we have a good turnout on Wednesday as well. It's being recorded. John's recorded it. We'll put it out there. It's going to be hard to put out a 2.5-hour video, but we'll figure it out. But I hope this begins that process of informing people and setting the stage. Pray for us. We'll enter that period of prayer. I'll answer Tyler's question that he asked a little while ago. And we will gather again at some point to begin talking more and working through this as well. Okay? So. Okay. Amen. So I will close us in prayer, and then we'll go on our way, and we will not meet in the parking lots to talk about things. Okay. So I like to close in the Lord's Prayer. That's my personal opinion and preference for closing a meeting. So if you will, join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Amen. Thank you all, by the way. Those of you that stuck around for 2.5 hours, for those that left, thank you as well. We appreciate your participation in this, and keep asking questions. Thank you all.